I repaired the tap on the yacht, and my son-in-law said plumbers have no place here. Then I looked him in the eyes and said nothing. I just smiled because he didn't know that the yacht belonged to me. Before I continue this story, please like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by your own family. My name is Luther Banks. I am 70 years old. Tonight I stood in the shadows of the main deck of the Black Pearl, a 150-foot super yacht, docked in the humid heat of the Miami harbor. The air was thick with the smell of salt water, expensive cigars, and even more expensive perfume. My son-in-law, Preston Walsh, was in his absolute element. He stood in the center of a circle of potential investors holding a crystal flute of vintage Dom Perignon, laughing too loudly at a joke that wasn't even funny. Preston looked the part of the successful investment banker he claimed to be. His teeth were whitened to a blinding porcelain. His tan was spray-on. Perfect. And on his wrist sat a gold Rolex that I knew for a fact was a high-quality replica because I had seen the charge on the credit card statement I secretly paid off every month. I adjusted the collar of my flannel shirt. It was clean and pressed, but it was old. The fabric was worn thin at the elbows, and the pattern had faded years ago. Against the backdrop of silk gowns, linen blazers, and the polished teak of the deck, I looked like hired help. Or worse, I looked like a charity case. And that is exactly how Preston treated me. He had invited me tonight not because he wanted my company, but because my daughter Naya had begged him. He spotted me near the hors d'oeuvres table, and a flicker of annoyance crossed his face, quickly replaced by a condescending smile as he guided his group toward me. "This is Luther Preston," announced his voice, projecting just loud enough to be heard over the smooth jazz band. "My wife Nia's father. He is a simple man, a retired handyman actually. If you ever need a drain unclogged or a fence painted, he is your guy." The group chuckled politely. I felt the heat rise in the back of my neck, not from shame, but from the sheer audacity of his lie. I had never been a handyman. I had built Banks Logistics from a single rusted delivery truck into a multi-state shipping empire before selling it for figures these men only dreamed of. But to Preston, I was just the old black man who drove a beat-up Ford F-150 and fixed things he was too lazy to maintain. "Nice to meet you," I said, extending my hand. The investor looked at my calloused palm, rough from years of hard, honest work, and offered a weak, hesitant shake, wiping his hand on his trousers immediately after. I watched them turn their backs on me, dismissing me as if I were part of the furniture. I walked over to the railing and looked out at the Miami skyline. I remembered when Beatrice, my late wife, told me to stay humble. She said, "Luther money shouts, but wealth whispers." I had taken her advice to heart, living a quiet life in our old neighborhood even after our bank accounts swelled with millions. But looking at Preston strutting around a boat he couldn't afford, I began to wonder if my silence had been a mistake. Suddenly a commotion erupted near the wet bar. A high-pitched spray of water hissed through the air, cutting through the music and the chatter. One of the brass faucets had blown a seal, sending a jet of water arching over the granite counter and soaking the velvet upholstery of the VIP lounge area. A woman screamed as the cold water hit the back of her evening gown. Preston turned purple. "Where is the staff?" he roared, his facade of cool sophistication crumbling instantly. "Get a towel. Someone turn it off." The young bartender was frozen, panic-stricken, trying to cover the spray with his hands, which only made the water spray wider, soaking the expensive teak decking. I knew that teak well. I knew how expensive it was to replace because I had signed the invoice for this vessel 3 months ago under my holding company. Without thinking, I moved. I didn't run, I just walked with the steady pace of a man who has solved problems his entire life. The guests parted ways, staring at the chaos. I reached under the bar cabinet. It was tight, dark, and wet. I didn't care about my shirt getting soaked. I found the isolation valve by feel. It was stuck, calcified by the salt air. I gritted my teeth, clamped my hand around the cold metal, and twisted. My knuckles scraped against the wood, tearing the skin, but I forced the valve. With a groan of metal on metal, it turned. The hissing stopped. The water receded. Silence returned to the deck, save for the dripping of the soaked bartender and the heavy breathing of the guests. I stood up, wiping my wet hands on a bar rag. I looked at the fitting. "It just needs a new washer," I said calmly, my voice steady. "I can fix it in 5 minutes if there is a toolkit on board." I expected a thank you, maybe a nod of appreciation for saving the upholstery. Instead, Preston marched over to me, his face twisted in fury. He snatched the rag from my hand and threw it on the wet floor. "Get away from there!" he hissed loud enough for everyone to hear. "You are embarrassing me. Look at you, Luther. You are soaking wet. You look like a drowned rat." "But I stopped the leak, Preston," I said, keeping my voice level. "I do not care what you stopped," he spat back, poking a finger into my chest. "You are getting grease on the furniture. This is a luxury yacht, Luther, not a public toilet. Plumbers have no place here among these people. Go sit in the back, or better yet, wait in the car. You are ruining the aesthetic." The silence that followed was heavy. The investors looked down at their shoes, pretending not to hear. My daughter Nia stood by the railing looking at the ocean, refusing to meet my eyes. She was ashamed. Not of him, but of me. She was letting him talk to me like this because she was terrified of losing the lifestyle he pretended to provide. That was the moment. That was the exact second the Camel S-back broke. I looked at Preston. I looked at the sweat beading on his forehead. I looked at the fear in his eyes that his party was ruined. And I smiled. It was a cold smile, one that he didn't understand. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I simply nodded. "You are right, Preston," I said softly. "I will get out of your way." I walked past him, past the investors who parted like the Red Sea and headed toward the stern. My clothes were wet, my knuckles were bleeding, but my head was high. As I walked into the shadows, away from the party lights, I pulled my old cracked smartphone from my pocket. I opened my messages and found the contact named Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was the sharpest attorney in Florida and the only person in Miami who knew that Luther Banks, the handyman, was actually Luther Banks, the billionaire owner of the marina we were currently docked in. I typed 2 words. "Start it." I hit send. I heard Preston laughing behind me, ordering another round of drinks to lighten the mood, trying to salvage his night. He didn't know it, but the leak I had just fixed was the last thing he would ever control in his life. The war had begun, and he was bringing a plastic knife to a nuclear fight. The valet brought the car around. It was an obsidian black Mercedes S-Class, sleek and shinier than a mirror. I knew it was a rental because I had seen the Hertz tag on the keyring earlier that evening, but Preston walked toward it as if he had personally commissioned it from the factory in Germany. He tipped the valet with a $1 bill and then opened the rear door. I moved to slide inside onto the plush beige leather, but Preston stopped me with a sharp hand motion. "Wait," he commanded. He reached into the front passenger footwell and pulled out a stack of old newspapers. They were yellowed and wrinkled, likely left over from weeks ago. With a look of utter disdain, he spread them out over the back seat, covering the pristine leather. "Sit on these," he said, his voice flat and cold. "I just had this car detailed. I do not want grease or whatever grime you have on your pants ruining the upholstery." My daughter Nia stood by the passenger door. Her eyes were downcast. She looked beautiful in her evening gown, but her posture was that of a beaten animal. She said nothing. She did not defend me. She just slid into the front seat and closed the door. I looked at the newspapers. The headlines were about the rising stock market, a world Preston pretended to rule but actually knew nothing about. I sat down. The paper crinkled loudly beneath me, a sound of humiliation that filled the silent garage. As we pulled onto the highway, the interior of the car was quiet except for the hum of the engine and the aggressive air conditioning. Then Preston started. It was not a conversation, it was an assault. He didn't even look at Nia. He just stared at the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "You embarrassed me tonight, Nia," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "How could you let him leave the house looking like that? A flannel shirt, work boots. Do you have any idea who I was talking to? That was the vice president of Archer Capital. And there is your father looking like he just crawled out from under a sink." "I am sorry," Preston, Nia whispered. "I tried to tell him to wear a suit, but he said he wanted to be comfortable." "Comfortable," Preston mocked. "Poor people prioritize comfort, Nia. Successful people prioritize image. You need to teach him his place. If he cannot dress like a civilized human being, he stays at that rundown shack he calls a house. I do not want him near my circle." I sat in the back watching the city lights blur past the tinted windows. I felt the texture of the newspaper under my hand. I wanted to speak. I wanted to tell him that my rundown shack sat on 4 acres of prime real estate that I had bought with cash 30 years ago. I wanted to tell him that the flannel shirt I wore cost more than his rented tuxedo because it was made from high-quality wool, not synthetic polyester. but I remained silent. I was gathering intelligence, and tonight Preston was giving me everything I needed. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. His eyes were full of a specific kind of hatred. It wasn't just that I was old or that I wasn't dressed well. It was deeper. It was the look of a man who needs someone to look down on, to feel tall. "You know, Luther," he said, raising his voice so I could hear him over the air conditioning. "I do not blame you for what you are. It is biology, really. Some people are just built for labor. You have those big, rough hands. You are good at fixing toilets and digging ditches. That is your ceiling, and that is fine. The world needs people to clean up the mess after the elite are done eating." I looked at my hands. They were resting on my knees. They were indeed large. They were scarred. There was a white line across my thumb from a fishing wire accident in '82. There was a burn mark on my wrist from a soldering iron. He saw these scars as signs of failure. I saw them as medals of honor. These hands had steered a shrimp boat through a hurricane when I was 22, saving the lives of 3 men. These hands had laid the foundation of my first warehouse, mixing the concrete manually because I couldn't afford a mixer. These hands had signed the acquisition papers for a fleet of cargo ships that now traverse the Atlantic. These hands had built an empire that generated more revenue in a week than Preston would see in his entire miserable life. But to him I was just a body, a tool, a relic of a lower class that he felt entitled to rule over. "You should not try to integrate into my world, Luther." He continued, his tone dripping with fake sympathy. "It is cruel to you, really. You look foolish trying to stand next to men of vision. Stick to your plumbing. Stick to your little repairs. Leave the thinking and the financing to those of us with the intellect for it." I met his eyes in the mirror. I kept my face completely neutral. "You are right, Preston," I said, my voice calm and deep. "I am just a man who works with his hands. I do not understand your world of finance." He smirked. "Exactly. At least you know your limitations." Just then, a harsh, jarring ringtone cut through the tension. It was coming from the car's dashboard. Preston had his phone connected to the Bluetooth system. The screen lit up with bright red letters. "Unknown caller." Preston frowned. He hesitated for a second, his confidence faltering. He tapped the answer button on the steering wheel, likely expecting another client he could impress. "Walsh speaking," he said, putting on his best executive voice. The response was instant, and it was not a client. It was a voice like gravel grinding against steel, loud, aggressive, and terrifying. "Listen to me, you lying piece of trash." Preston's eyes went wide. He lunged for the volume knob, but his hands were shaking. "You missed the payment last Tuesday," the voice boomed, filling the luxury cabin. The interest just compounded. "You owe us $80,000 by Friday, or we are going to stop asking nicely. We know where your wife lives. We know where that pretty little car is parked." Preston frantically mashed the disconnect button, his face draining of all color. The call ended, but the threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The silence that followed was absolute. Naya turned to him. Her hands were trembling. "Preston, who was that? Who knows where we live? What payment?" Preston let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh that sounded nothing like the confident man from the yacht. He wiped sweat from his forehead. "It was nothing, honey. Just a spam call. You know how these debt collectors are, they call the wrong numbers all the time. Or it was a prank. Probably just some kids messing around." He refused to look at her. He gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. "That did not sound like a prank," Preston Nia said, her voice rising in panic. "He said $80,000. It is a wrong number, Nia. Drop it." He snapped, his anger returning as a shield for his fear. "Do not be so gullible. I am an investment banker. Do you think I have trouble with money? It is ridiculous." I sat in the back on my newspapers and I watched him. I watched the way his eyes darted to the side mirrors, checking if anyone was following us. I watched the way a vein in his neck throbbed with pure adrenaline. I knew that voice on the phone. I didn't know the man personally, but I knew the type. That wasn't a bank. That wasn't a credit card company. That was the street. Preston wasn't just broke. He was in deep with loan sharks. He was drowning. And he had just lied to my daughter about the water rising around her neck. I looked out the window and allowed myself a small, cold smile. He thought I was a plumber. He thought I was a simpleton. He didn't know that I recognized the smell of desperation because I had spent 40 years crushing competitors who smelled exactly like him. He was in debt. He was scared, and he was vulnerable. I didn't need to lift a finger, I just needed to watch him fall. Or better yet, I could be the one to push him. I took out my phone, keeping it low so he couldn't see. I sent a text to my private investigator. Find out who holds Walsh S. debt. I want names and I want amounts. Tonight. The ride of shame was over. The hunt had just begun. The house I lived in was not much to look at from the street. It was a single-story bungalow with peeling white paint and a porch that leaned slightly to the left. It sat like a stubborn old man amidst a forest of glass and steel condominiums. Developers had offered me $2 million for the land just last year. I had torn up their check without a second thought because this house was where Beatrice and I had raised Nia. It was where my wife took her last breath. It was not an asset. It was a memory box. But when Preston walked through the front door the next morning, he did not see memories. He saw a pile of cash that could save his life. He walked in wearing a polo shirt that cost more than my monthly utility bill, wrinkling his nose as if he had just stepped into a sewer. He made a show of wiping his expensive loafers on the welcome mat, aggressively scrubbing them as though my floorboards were contagious. Nia followed him inside, looking pale and exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night. "God, it smells like old people in here," Preston announced loudly, not even bothering to greet me. "It is that smell of dust and stagnation. You really need to open a window, Luther. Or better yet, burn some sage. It is depressing." I was sitting in my armchair drinking black coffee. I did not stand up. I watched him pace around my small living room, picking up a framed photo of Beatrice and then setting it down face down. He looked at the walls, measuring them with his eyes. He looked at the ceiling, checking for leaks. He was appraising the property right in front of me like a butcher eyeing a cow before the slaughter. Nia sat on the sofa, wringing her hands. "Dad, we need to talk," she whispered. Preston cut her off. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a tri-folded brochure. He tossed it onto the coffee table. It slid across the wood and stopped right in front of my mug. The cover featured a stock photo of two elderly people smiling vacantly at a checkerboard under the title Shady Rest Senior Living Community. I looked at the brochure, and then I looked at Preston. "What is this?" I asked, my voice calm. "It is your new life," Preston said, clapping his hands together. "Look, I have been doing some research. Living here alone at your age is dangerous. What if you fall? What if you leave the stove on? This place is fantastic, Luther. They have nurses on staff 24/7. They have bingo nights. They have Jell-O cups. It is everything a man of your station could want." I picked up the brochure. I knew this place. It was a state-subsidized facility on the edge of town known for understaffing and over-medication. It was a warehouse for the elderly whom families wanted to forget. It cost next to nothing, which was exactly the point. "And my house?" I asked, looking up at him. "What happens to my house? We sell it." "Obviously," Preston said, shrugging as if it were the only logical conclusion. "The market is hot right now. If we list it by Monday, we could have a cash buyer by Friday. We take the proceeds, pay for your care at this facility, and Nia and I will manage the rest of the funds to ensure they are invested wisely for your future." Invested wisely. He meant paid directly to the loan sharks who had called him in the car. He meant funneled into his failing schemes. Nia started to cry, soft, broken sobs that shook her shoulders. "Dad, please," she choked out. "We are in trouble." "That call in the car last night, it was real. They said they would hurt him. They said they would come to our house. We need the money, Dad. We are desperate." I looked at my daughter. My heart broke for her pain, but it hardened against her weakness. She was asking me to give up my home, my dignity, and my legacy to save a man who treated me like dirt. She was willing to throw me into a decaying facility to pay for his mistakes. Preston walked over to Nia and put a hand on her shoulder, squeezing it tight. "See what you are doing to her," he said to me, his voice dropping to a manipulative whisper. "You are making your daughter cry. You are sitting here in this gold mine of a property, selfishly holding on to the past while your family is in danger. Do the right thing, Luther. Be a man for once in your life and help us. Sign the house over. Pack a bag. The shuttle for Shady Rest comes tomorrow at noon." He smiled. It was the smile of a predator who thinks the trap has already snapped shut. He thought he had won. He thought he could bully the simple handyman into submission. I carefully folded the brochure. I aligned the edges perfectly. Then I tore it in half, and then in half again. I dropped the pieces into my coffee mug, watching the cheap paper dissolve in the dark liquid. "No," I said. The smile vanished from Preston's face. "What did you say?" I said no. I am not selling my house. I am not going to a home. and I am certainly not giving you a single dime to pay off your gambling debts. If you owe money, Preston, that is your problem. Get a second job, sell your watch. But do not come into my house and tell me to leave." Preston's face turned a violent shade of red. The vein in his forehead bulged. He slammed his fist down on the table, making the coffee mugs rattle. "You listen to me, you senile old fool," he shouted, leaning over me, his spit landing on my cheek. "You do not have a choice. Do you think I am asking you? I am telling you. You are losing your mind, Luther. Everyone knows it. You forget things. You wander. You are a danger to yourself." I stared at him. I had never forgotten a detail in my life. I ran a logistics empire. I remembered shipping codes from 1995. "I am perfectly sane, Preston," I said, icy cold. "Are you?" Preston sneered, straightening up and adjusting his collar. "Because that is not what the doctor is going to say. I have already spoken to Dr. Evans. He agrees that your cognitive decline is rapid. If you do not sign these papers willingly, I will petition the court for emergency guardianship. I will have you declared mentally incompetent. I will take power of attorney over everything you own, and I will stick you in the cheapest room in that nursing home and lock the door." Naya looked up, her eyes wide with horror. "Preston, you cannot do that. You cannot declare him insane." "Watch me," Preston snapped at her. "It is him or us, Nia. Choose." He looked back at me, his eyes burning with malice. "You have 24 hours, Luther. Pack your bags or I call the lawyers and have you dragged out of here in a straitjacket." He grabbed Nia by the arm and marched her out the door, slamming it so hard the windows shook. I sat in the silence of my living room. The threat hung in the air like smoke. He was going to try to take my freedom. He was going to use the law to bury me. I looked at the torn brochure floating in my coffee. I picked up my phone. I did not call the police. I called Sarah. "Sarah," I said when she answered, "prepare the file and find me the best forensic accountant in the state. My son-in-law wants to play legal games. Let us show him how the big boys play." I stood up. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from rage. He wanted my house. He wanted my life. He was about to find out that he had just tried to evict the owner of the bank. The toolbox felt heavier than usual as I walked up the driveway of my daughter's house. It was not the weight of the wrenches or the hammers that burdened me, but the weight of the deception I was about to perform. Nia had called me earlier that morning, her voice tight with stress, complaining about a leak in the master bathroom. Under normal circumstances, I would have sent one of my company's maintenance crews to handle it within the hour. But these were not normal times. I needed access. I needed to get inside that house without Preston hovering over my shoulder, and a broken pipe was my golden ticket. Naya met me at the door looking exhausted. Her eyes were puffy, and she was already dressed for work in a suit that looked like it needed dry cleaning. She hugged me briefly, a quick squeeze that felt more like a cry for help than a greeting. She told me she had to run to the office, that she was already late, and that Preston was out meeting with clients. She left me the key and told me to lock up when I was done. I watched her drive away in her sedan, and a wave of sadness washed over me. She was running herself ragged, trying to maintain a facade that was already crumbling. As soon as her car disappeared around the corner, I locked the front door and moved with purpose. I did not go to the bathroom. I went straight to Preston's home office. The room was a shrine to his ego. Framed certificates of participation in minor business seminars lined the walls, alongside photos of him shaking hands with local politicians who looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. The desk was mahogany, oversized, and cluttered with unopened mail. I wasn't interested in the mail. I was interested in what he kept hidden. I scanned the room. My eyes landed on a large, abstract painting behind the desk. It was garish and tasteless, exactly the kind of thing Preston would think signaled sophistication. I walked over and swung the frame away from the wall. There it was, a wall safe. It was a standard digital model, the kind you could buy at a hardware store for $200. Preston was predictable. He wasn't a criminal mastermind, he was just a greedy amateur. I pulled a small notebook from my pocket. My private investigator, Sarah, had been busy. She had provided me with a list of potential combinations based on Preston's digital footprint. I tried his birthday. Nothing. I tried Nia's birthday. The red light blinked. Error. Of course he wouldn't use his wife's birthday. That would imply he cared about her. I looked at the next number on the list. It was a date Sarah had flagged from a receipt for a diamond bracelet Preston had bought 6 months ago. October 14th. It wasn't Nia's birthday, and it wasn't their anniversary. It was the date he met his mistress. I punched in 1014, the light turned green, the mechanism clicked. The door swung open. I felt a surge of disgust so potent it almost made me gag. He valued his infidelity more than his marriage. I reached inside and pulled out a stack of thick manila envelopes. I sat in his leather executive chair and began to read. The first document was a second mortgage on this house. Nia's signature was at the bottom, but the penmanship was slightly off. It was a good forgery, but I knew my daughter's hand. She looped her L's differently. He had leveraged their home without her knowing. I opened the next file. This was the smoking gun. It was a ledger of wire transfers. Preston wasn't just gambling away his own money. He was moving funds from a shell company called PW Ventures. I recognized the routing numbers immediately. They belonged to a subsidiary of Banks Logistics, my company. Preston had been skimming off the top of a vendor contract I had approved years ago as a favor to Nia to help get his business started. He was stealing from me to pay his bookies. I did the math quickly in my head, tallying the mortgage, the credit cards, the vendor theft, and the high-interest loans from names that sounded like shell corporations for organized crime. The total was staggering. $5 million. He wasn't just in a hole. He was buried under a mountain. He had burned through everything. If he didn't pay this back, prison would be the least of his worries. These people would kill him, and they wouldn't hesitate to hurt Nia to get to him. My hands were shaking as I took photos of every page. I needed evidence. I needed to build a fortress of proof so high that when I brought it crashing down on him, he would never crawl out. I was just finishing with the last document when I heard the distinct sound of the front door opening downstairs. I froze. I checked my watch. It was 11 in the morning. Nia was at work. Preston was supposed to be at a client lunch. Heavy footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor, followed by the click-clack of high heels. Laughter drifted up the stairs. It was Preston, and he wasn't alone. Panic surged through me. I couldn't be found here. If Preston saw me with these papers, he would know the game was up. He was desperate, and desperate men are dangerous. He might attack me, or worse, destroy the evidence before I could get it to Sarah. I shoved the papers back into the safe and slammed the door shut, swinging the painting back into place just as the footsteps reached the landing. There was no time to get to the door. I scanned the room. The only hiding place was the walk-in closet filled with Preston's suits. I dove inside, pulling the louvered doors shut just as the office door swung open. Through the slats, I could see them. Preston walked in, loosening his tie, his face flushed. A woman followed him. She was young blonde and wearing a dress that cost more than the car Preston drove. This must be the mistress. I cannot believe we have the house to ourselves, she giggled, running a hand along the mahogany desk. I thought your wife worked from home on Tuesdays. She does, Preston said, grabbing a bottle of scotch from the shelf. But I sent her on a wild goose chase to the accountant. She thinks we are auditing our taxes to save money. She is so gullible it is pathetic. He poured 2 drinks and handed one to the woman. She took a sip and wrinkled her nose. Is this the cheap stuff, she asked? For now, baby Preston laughed. But not for long. Listen, I have good news. The plan is working. The old man is cracking. I put the pressure on him yesterday and he looked like he was about to have a stroke right there in his living room. The woman hopped onto the edge of the desk, swinging her legs. You mean Nia's dad? The plumber. The very same, Preston sneered. He is the key to everything. I spoke to the guy who runs the betting pool today. He gave me an extension, but only because I promised him a lump sum by the end of the month. And where are you getting a lump sum? The woman asked. You told me you were tapped out. I am tapped out, Preston admitted, taking a large gulp of scotch. But Luther isn't. That rundown shack of his sits on a gold mine of a lot. Once I get power of attorney, I can liquidate it immediately. It is worth $800,000 easy. That covers the interest and buys us some breathing room. But what about him? The woman asked. Won't he need that money for care? Preston set his glass down hard on the desk. Who cares what he needs? He is useless. He is just taking up space. Honestly, if the shock of moving him kills him, it would be a mercy. It would certainly make my life easier. If the old man dies early, I am relieved. I do not have to pay for a nursing home and I get the house free and clear. I just need to sell that ratted-out shack, and I am back in the black. I stood in the dark closet, surrounded by the smell of his expensive cologne, and I felt a cold rage settle in my bones. It was one thing to steal. It was another to wish for death. He was talking about my murder not with a gun but with stress and neglect. He was planning to use my corpse as a stepping stone to clear his gambling debts. I gripped the handle of a wrench I had instinctively shoved into my pocket. I wanted to burst out. I wanted to break him right there. But I stopped myself. Violence was too good for him. Violence was quick. I didn't want him broken. I wanted him erased. I wanted to strip him of every illusion of power he had until he was naked and shivering in the gutter. I held my breath as they finished their drinks. I listened to them leave the room laughing about spending my money. I waited 10 minutes until I heard the front door close again. Then I stepped out of the closet. I didn't fix the pipe. I walked out of that house with the photos on my phone and a heart made of stone. Preston Walsh wanted me dead. He was about to find out that he had just dug his own grave. If my son-in-law wanted a senile old man, I decided I would give him a performance worthy of an Academy Award. He thought my mind was fading, so I decided to let him believe the fog had rolled in thick and heavy. It was a strategic retreat. In the art of war, you appear weak when you are strong and confused when you are sharp. Preston was arrogant, and arrogance is a blindfold. I intended to tighten the knot. I was sitting on my porch swing when his black rental car pulled into the driveway. He stepped out checking his watch, his face a mask of impatience. He was not alone. A short, balding man with a nervous twitch carrying a leather medical bag trailed behind him. I knew this was the doctor he had bought. I didn't stand up. I just rocked back and forth, staring blankly at the oak tree in the front yard. Preston marched up the steps. "Luther, we are here. Get inside." I looked at him slowly, squinting as if the sun were in my eyes. I tilted my head. "Oh, hello. Are you the delivery boy? I did not order a pizza, but if you have pepperoni, I might take a slice." Preston stopped dead in his tracks. A smile slowly spread across his face. It was a cruel, predatory smile. He turned to the doctor. "See? I told you. He does not even know who I am. He thinks I am the pizza guy. It is worse than I thought, doctor." He turned back to me, his voice loud and slow like he was speaking to a child. "I am not the delivery boy, Luther. I am Preston. Naya S. husband. Remember." I scratched my head. "Preston. No, that does not ring a bell. Did you fix the sink last week? You did a terrible job, son. It is still leaking." Preston laughed, a harsh barking sound. He clapped the doctor on the shoulder. "This is going to be easier than I thought. Come on, Luther. Dr. Vance needs to ask you a few questions, just to make sure you are okay." I let them lead me inside, shuffling my feet, intentionally dragging my heels. I slumped into my armchair, letting my mouth hang slightly open. Dr. Vance set his bag on the coffee table. He smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap mints. He pulled out a pen light and a clipboard, avoiding my gaze. He was a small man with sweaty hands. I could smell the desperation on him. He wasn't a doctor who cured people. He was a doctor who signed whatever paper was put in front of him for the right price. "Mr. Banks," Dr. Vance said, clicking his pen, "can you tell me what year it is?" I looked at the ceiling. 1995, I said confidently. "Good year for shipping." Preston snorted from the corner of the room. "See? He is living in the past." The doctor scribbled on his pad. "And who is the current president of the United States, Mr. Banks?" I looked at Dr. Vance directly. "Reagan." "No, wait. Is it Kennedy?" Dr. Vance nodded, checking a box. "Severe disorientation regarding time and current events. Can you count backwards from 10 for me?" I started counting. 10, 8, 5, blue. Preston was practically vibrating with excitement. He was texting on his phone, probably telling Nia or his mistress that the old man was officially cooked. Dr. Vance leaned in closer to check my pupils with his light. This was my moment. The proximity was perfect. Preston was distracted by his phone. The doctor was inches from my face. I grabbed Dr. Vance's wrist. My grip was iron. The shaking stopped instantly. My eyes cleared. I stared straight into his pupils and saw the fear spike. I dropped the act for exactly 3 seconds. "I know about Georgia, doctor," I whispered, my voice low and dangerous like a growling dog. "I know why you lost your license in Atlanta in 2019. I know about the fraudulent prescriptions." Dr. Vance froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. He tried to pull away, but I held him fast. "If you sign that paper, I will make sure the medical board in this state finds out about your new identity," I hissed. "You are not a doctor. You are a criminal, and I have the files." Then I let go. I slumped back into the chair, my eyes going vacant again. I smiled, a goofy, lopsided grin. "Do you have a lollipop, doctor?" "I like the red ones." Dr. Vance stumbled back, knocking over his bag. His hands were trembling violently now. He looked at me with pure terror. He looked at Preston, who had not heard a word of our exchange. "What is wrong?" Preston asked, looking up. "Why do you look like you saw a ghost?" The doctor wiped sweat from his forehead with a shaking hand. He is very confused, Mr. Walsh. Advanced stages. Very unpredictable." Preston walked over and picked up the clipboard. He shoved it into the doctor's chest. "Great. Then sign the paper. That is what I am paying you $5,000 for. Certification of mild cognitive impairment with a recommendation for assisted living. Sign it." Dr. Vance looked at the paper. Then he looked at me. I was humming a tune, softly staring at the wall, but I kept one eye on him. He was trapped. On one side was a desperate man who owed him money. On the other was a man who knew his darkest secret. But greed and fear of the immediate threat won out. He was more afraid of Preston not paying him than he was of my threat, which might have seemed like a hallucination to him in that moment. He took the pen. His hand shook so bad the signature looked like a seismograph reading during an earthquake. He signed it. "There," Preston declared, snatching the paper away. "Step 1 complete. Mild cognitive impairment. This gives me medical power of attorney in emergencies." He waved the paper in front of my face. "Did you see this, Luther? This says you are officially crazy. You belong to me now." I stared at the paper. I didn't blink. I didn't react. Inside, I was cheering. He had just handed me the final nail for his coffin. By forcing a bribed doctor to sign a false diagnosis, he had committed fraud. And since Dr. Vance was unlicensed in this state, it was a felony. Preston ushered the terrified doctor out of the house. "Thank you, Dr. Vance. Excellent work. I will wire the funds tonight." He slammed the door and turned to me. "Well, delivery boy, looks like I am the one delivering the news now. You are done, Luther. Next week we sell the house." He walked out whistling, leaving me alone in the living room. I stood up and stretched my back. The act was exhausting, but it was working. He was overconfident. He was reckless. And he had just documented his own crime. I walked to the window and watched him drive away. "Enjoy your victory lap, Preston," I said to the empty room, "because you just ran straight off a cliff." Step 1 was indeed complete, but not the way he thought. He had the paper. But I had the truth. And the truth was about to hurt him more than any lie ever could. The white waiter jacket smelled of mothballs and desperation. It was 2 sizes too small tight across my shoulders and short at the wrists, but Preston insisted I wear it. He had fired the catering staff an hour before the party started, claiming they were incompetent, but I knew the truth. His credit card had been declined by the agency. He needed free labor, and in his twisted mind, I was the perfect candidate. He stood in the center of the living room adjusting his silk tie while I struggled with the buttons of the uniform. "You look purposeful, Luther," he said with a sneer, examining me like a general inspecting a raw recruit. "Why pay decent money for service when I have family who needs to earn their keep? Besides, it keeps you humble. You were getting a little too arrogant lately with all that talk about your rights." Naya walked in carrying a tray of appetizers. She stopped when she saw me. Her face crumpled. "Dad, take that off," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "You are not a servant, Preston. This is humiliating." Preston spun on her, his eyes flashing with danger. "Do not start, Nia. We have 50 guests arriving in 10 minutes. Important guests. People who can buy my debt. Your father likes to be helpful. Do not ruin this for me." He turned to the first group of arrivals, greeting them with a warm, expansive smile that hid the shark beneath. As the house filled with people, I became invisible. I walked through the crowd with a silver tray of champagne flutes, my head down, eyes focused on the floor. I heard Preston holding court near the fireplace. "Oh, that is just my father-in-law," he told a wealthy couple from Palm Beach, waving a hand in my direction. "He gets restless if he sits still. He spent his whole life in manual labor, you know. He actually enjoys serving. It makes him feel useful." The couple laughed, sipping their drinks, unaware that the man serving them had once owned the shipping containers that brought their luxury cars into the country. The night dragged on and the humiliation deepened. The guests took their cues from Preston. They realized I was a target, a prop for their amusement. A man in a blue velvet blazer snapped his fingers at me. "Boy, bring me another scotch and make it a double." I felt the heat rise in my chest at the word boy, but I poured the drink. A woman handed me her empty napkin with a look of distaste, as if my very presence might infect her. I took it without a word. Preston watched it all from across the room, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. He was feeding off my degradation. It made him feel powerful. It made him forget that he was drowning in $5 million of debt. He signaled for me to bring a fresh bottle of red wine to the center of the room where he was standing on the expensive Persian rug I had bought for Nia 3 years ago. I approached with the bottle, carefully balancing it on the silver tray. The room was crowded. I moved slowly, weaving between the guests. As I passed Preston, he shifted his weight. It was subtle, a small movement of his right leg. He stuck his foot out directly in my path. I tried to correct my balance, but my heavy work boots caught his polished loafer. I stumbled. The tray tipped. The bottle of heavy Cabernet Sauvignon launched from the silver platter and shattered on the floor. Red wine exploded outward, splashing across the white rug and splattering onto Preston's trousers. The music stopped. The conversation died instantly. The sound of shattering glass echoed in the sudden silence. "You clumsy old fool," Preston roared. He didn't hesitate. He didn't check to see if I was hurt. He stepped forward, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage, and swung his hand. The slap connected with my cheek with a wet, meaty crack. The force of it knocked my glasses askew. My head snapped to the side. A collective gasp went through the room. I stood there, the sting burning my skin, the metallic taste of blood inside my cheek. Dad, Nia screamed. She dropped the tray she was holding and ran toward me. Preston caught her by the arm, spinning her around. He leaned into her face, his voice a low hiss that carried across the silent room. "You stay right there, right? Do not touch him. He ruined my rug. He ruined my night. If you take one step toward him, Nia, I swear I will throw you out on the street with him. Do you understand me?" Nia froze. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, terror in her eyes. She was paralyzed by the threat of losing everything. She backed away, sobbing quietly into her hands. Preston turned back to me. "Look at this mess," he spat, pointing at the wine-soaked rug. "You are useless, Luther. You cannot even carry a tray. Get on your knees and clean this up. Now." I slowly straightened my posture. I adjusted my glasses. I did not wipe the wine that had splashed onto my face. I let it drip down my chin like war paint. The room was spinning slightly, but my mind was razor sharp. I looked at Preston. I looked at the guests who were staring at me with a mixture of horror and pity. They expected me to break. They expected the old handyman to cry, to beg for forgiveness, to get on his knees and scrub. Instead, I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a wolf that has just felt the trap snap shut on its prey's leg. It was a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Preston frowned, confused by my reaction. He took a step back, unsettled by the coldness radiating from me. "I am so sorry, Preston," I said, my voice steady and deep, booming slightly in the quiet room. "I am just an old man with clumsy feet. Let me help you with that stain." I stepped forward, invading his personal space. He flinched, expecting me to hit him back, but I didn't raise a fist. I reached out with my hand, the one that wasn't holding the tray, and patted him on the chest, right over the pocket of his expensive blazer. It looked like a submissive gesture, a clumsy attempt at an apology from a beaten servant. "Let me get that for you," I murmured, brushing at a drop of wine on his lapel. With a sleight of hand I had perfected over 40 years of negotiating deals in back rooms, I slipped a tiny black disc, no larger than a button, into his breast pocket. It was a high-fidelity listening device Sarah had given me that morning. It had a battery life of 48 hours and a range of 2 miles. Preston swatted my hand away, disgusted. "Get off me," he growled. "Just get out of my sight. Go to the kitchen and stay there until everyone leaves." I nodded slowly. "As you wish, Preston." I turned and walked away. My head held high despite the ridiculous jacket. I could feel his eyes boring into my back. He thought he had won. He thought he had put the dog in its place. He didn't know that the dog was now listening to every heartbeat, every lie, and every desperate phone call he was about to make. I walked into the kitchen and pulled out my phone. I put in my earbuds and activated the app Sarah had installed. The audio was crystal clear. I could hear Preston breathing. I could hear him apologizing to the guests, laughing it off, blaming the senility of his charity case father-in-law. And then I heard him walk away from the crowd. I heard a door close. I heard him dial a number. "It is me," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I need more time. The old man is difficult, but I broke him tonight. I promise you I will have the deed to the house by Friday. Just do not hurt me." I sat on a stool in the kitchen, listening to his fear. I touched my stinging cheek. The pain was there, but it was distant. The slap had been the final transaction. He had bought his own destruction, and the price was a listening device in his pocket. I poured myself a glass of tap water and waited. The party was just getting started, and I had the best seat in the house. For 5 years, I have been the invisible architecture holding up the crumbling facade of my daughter's life. Preston believed Nia was a financial wizard, a genius consultant who brought in 5 figures a month to support his lavish lifestyle. The truth was far more pathetic and far more expensive. Nia was a part-time archivist for a local museum. She made $40,000 a year. The Mercedes in the driveway, the designer suits in the closet, the membership at the country club, and the endless stream of premium scotch were all paid for by me. I had set up a blind trust under the name Sphinx Holdings when they got married. It was an automated system designed to pay off the credit card balance in full every 30 days, no matter how high it climbed. I did it because I remembered the poverty of my own childhood, and I wanted my little girl to never know the fear of an empty fridge. I thought I was shielding her. I realize now, sitting in the dark of my kitchen with a laptop glowing in front of me, that I had not been shielding her. I had been feeding a parasite. I looked at the screen. Dead. The monthly statement for the American Express Black Card was pending. The balance was $12,400. Most of it was charges at hotels, restaurants, and jewelry stores that Nia never visited. I moved the cursor to the administrative settings. My finger hovered over the trackpad. For years, fear had stopped me from clicking this button. Fear that Preston would leave her. Fear that she would be destitute. But after last night, after the slap and the humiliation, I realized that poverty would be a step up for her. Poverty was honest. This marriage was a lie funded by my own hard work. I clicked suspend account. Then I clicked freeze assets on the linked checking account. Finally, I sent a secure message to the bank manager who had handled my accounts for 20 years. Do not authorize any overdrafts. Do not accept any calls from Mr. Walsh. Refer all inquiries to legal. The trap was set. Now, I just had to wait for the animal to step into it. It did not take long. The listening device in Preston's pocket came to life at 1 in the afternoon. The background noise was distinct. The clink of heavy silverware on fine china, the low hum of polite conversation, and the soft melody of a live piano. He was at the Gilded Lily, the most expensive lunch spot in the financial district. He wasn't with a client. I heard the voice of the blonde woman from his office. She was giggling about the necklace he had promised to buy her after lunch. Order whatever you want, babe. Preston boasted, his voice loud and confident. The old man finally cracked last night. The house sale is practically a done deal. We are going to be flush with cash by the end of the week. They ate. They drank. They racked up a bill that likely exceeded $500. I sat in my kitchen drinking tap water and listening. Then the moment arrived. Check, please, Preston called out, snapping his fingers. I heard the rustle of the leather billfold. I heard the slap of the heavy metal card hitting the table. There was a pause, a long, stretching silence. I am sorry, sir, the waiter's voice was discreet but audible. The card was declined. Preston chuckled a nervous sound. That is impossible. Run it again. It is probably just a chip error. This card has no limit. I tried it 3 times, sir, the waiter insisted, his tone hardening. It is showing a code for lost or stolen. Do you have another form of payment? The silence that followed was delicious. I could hear Preston shifting in his chair. I could hear him patting his pockets. He didn't have cash. He never carried cash because he thought it was beneath him. Here, try this one, he said, his voice tight. Another pause. Another decline. Sir, the waiter said, loud enough for neighboring tables to hear. Is there a problem? Preston's composure shattered. He excused himself, muttering about bank incompetence, and marched toward the exit, probably to the restroom or the patio. The sound of a heavy door opening and closing followed. Then he dialed a number. Nia picked up on the first ring. Hello. What did you do? Preston screamed into the phone. He was no longer the suave banker. He was a cornered rat. What do you mean, Preston? Nia's voice was small, trembling. The cards, Preston roared. They are all dead. I am at lunch with a key investor, and I cannot pay the bill. You embarrassed me. Did you forget to transfer the funds? I told you to handle the accounts this morning. I didn't touch anything, Nia cried. I checked the app. It says the accounts are frozen. It says suspicious activity. Fix it. Preston spat, his voice venomous. Call the bank. Scream at them. I do not care what you have to do. Get the money flowing, Naya, or do not bother being there when I get home. I am sick of your incompetence. You have one job, keep the money moving. He hung up. I heard him hyperventilating, trying to compose himself before going back to the table to explain to his mistress why he couldn't pay for her lobster. I took the earbuds out for a moment. My hands were shaking. He treated my daughter like an employee he was about to fire. He blamed her for the failure of the money spigot he didn't even know I controlled. 3 hours later, the front door of my daughter's house slammed open. I heard it through the device which was still in his pocket. He hadn't gone back to work. He had stormed home. "Where is it?" he shouted. Nia was sobbing. "I told you I called the bank. They would not talk to me. They said the primary account holder locked it." "I am the primary account holder," Preston yelled. The sound of furniture being overturned crashed through the audio feed. He was throwing chairs. He was tearing the living room apart. He wasn't looking for paperwork. He was looking for liquidity. He stormed up the stairs. I heard the heavy thud of his footsteps. He went into the master bedroom. Drawers were ripped open and dumped onto the floor. "Preston." "Stop, please," Nia begged. "What are you doing? I need cash," Preston grunted. The loan sharks called again. "They want $10,000 by tonight just for the interest. If the cards are dead, I need collateral." I heard the sound of a jewelry box being smashed against the wall. "No," Nia screamed, a sound of pure heartbreak. "Not that. Please, Preston, not that. That was my mother's. Beatrice gave me that necklace on my 16th birthday. It is the only thing I have left of hers." "I do not care whose it was," Preston snarled. "It is gold, it is diamonds, and right now it is my life insurance. Get out of my way." There was a scuffle, a cry of pain from Nia. He had pushed her. I gripped the edge of my kitchen counter so hard my knuckles turned white. My fingernails dug into the wood until I felt them snap. Blood trickled down my palm. He had put his hands on my daughter. He was stealing my dead wife's legacy to pay for his sins. I closed my eyes and forced myself to breathe. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to drive over there, to kick down the door and tear him apart with my bare hands. But I couldn't. Not yet. If I intervened now, I would save her jewelry, but I would lose the war. He would spin it. He would gaslight her. He would say he was desperate, and she would forgive him because she was conditioned to forgive him. I needed him to go further. I needed him to cross a line from which there was no return. I listened as he stormed out of the house, the jewelry jingling in his pocket. I listened to Nia weeping on the floor of her bedroom alone. I opened my eyes. They were dry. The time for sadness was over. I picked up my phone and dialed Sarah. "He just stole jewelry worth $50,000, I said, my voice cold as the grave. "He is heading to a pawn shop. I want you to find out which one. And I want you to buy the ticket. He thinks he is selling assets. I am building a felony case." The financial cut was just the first incision. Now I was going to bleed him dry. I asked Nia to meet me at a diner on the outskirts of the city, a place with flickering neon signs and coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. It was the kind of establishment Preston would rather die than enter, which made it the safest place for us to talk. I arrived 30 minutes early, sitting in a booth that faced the door, clutching a thick envelope in my hands. Inside was the ammunition I hoped would shatter the spell my son-in-law had cast over my daughter. I had photos of him with his mistress exiting a hotel room. I had copies of the promissory notes he had signed with loan sharks. I had the pawn shop receipt for Beatrice's necklace. I did not bring bank statements showing my millions. Money would not wake her up. Only betrayal could do that. Nia walked in looking like a ghost of the vibrant woman she used to be. Her skin was pale and she wore dark sunglasses even though it was overcast outside. She slid into the booth opposite me and didn't even take off her coat. She looked over her shoulder, constantly scanning the room as if she expected Preston to jump out from behind the counter. "Dad, I cannot stay long," she whispered. "Preston thinks I'm at the grocery store. If I take too long, he gets suspicious. He checks the mileage on the car." My heart broke hearing that. He treated her like a prisoner. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was cold. "Nia, I need you to look at something," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "I know you love him. I know you want to believe in him, but you are living with a stranger." I pushed the envelope toward her. She looked at it with fear as if it contained a bomb. "What is this?" she asked. "It is the truth, Nia. It is where he goes when he says he is working late. It is who he spends his money on. And it is the reason he stole your mother's jewelry." She hesitated, her hand hovering over the flap. Then with a trembling breath she opened it. She pulled out the first photo. It was a high-resolution shot of Preston holding the blonde woman's waist, laughing in a way he never laughed with Nia. She stared at it for a long time. Then she pulled out the pawn ticket. She saw the item description. Vintage diamond necklace. She saw the signature. Preston Walsh. I waited for the anger. I waited for the tears. I waited for her to slam her hand on the table and scream that she was leaving him. Instead, she slowly put the photos back into the envelope. She pushed it back to me. She took a sip of water, and when she looked up, her eyes were dry and empty. "You do not understand, Dad," she said, her voice flat. I blinked, confused. "What is there to understand, Nia? He is cheating on you. He stole from you. He is in debt to criminals. He is under a lot of pressure," she recited as if reading from a script. "That woman is his business partner. They have to be close to close deals. It is how the industry works. And the jewelry, he told me about that. He borrowed it. He is going to buy it back next week with interest. He is doing this for us, Dad. He is trying to build an empire, and sometimes you have to make sacrifices." I stared at her, horrified. This wasn't loyalty. This was brainwashing. Preston had twisted her reality so thoroughly that she couldn't tell up from down. He had convinced her that his abuse was actually ambition, and that his infidelity was just business. "Nia, he pawned your mother's necklace," I said, my voice rising. "He forged your signature on a second mortgage. He is not building an empire, he is digging a hole, and he is throwing you in it to break his fall." "Stop it," she hissed, looking around to see if anyone was watching. "You are just jealous. You have always hated him because he is successful. You want us to fail. Preston told me you would do this. He said you would try to turn me against him because you are lonely and confused." I sat back feeling like I had been punched in the gut. Preston had inoculated her against the truth. He had predicted my move and poisoned the well. "I am not confused, Nia," I said softly. "I am the only one seeing things clearly. Look at yourself. You are terrified of him. You are tracking your own mileage. That is not a marriage. That is a hostage situation." She stood up abruptly, knocking over the salt shaker. "I have to go. I should not have come. He was right about you. You are toxic." She turned to leave, but before she could take a step, her phone began to ring. It wasn't a normal ringtone. It was a specific jarring alarm she must have set for him. She froze. She pulled the phone from her pocket and stared at the screen. Her face went white. "He knows," she whispered. She answered the phone, her hands shaking so hard she almost dropped it. "Hello, Preston." I could hear his voice from across the table. It was a scream distorted by the speaker but unmistakable in its rage. "Where are you?" I checked the location tracker. "Why are you at a diner? Who are you with?" "I am just getting coffee," Nia stammered, tears finally spilling over. "Do not lie to me," he roared. "I can see the other phone signal next to you. You are with him, aren't you? You are with that old parasite. I told you not to talk to him. I told you he is dangerous. Please, Preston." Nia begged, cowering in the middle of the diner. "We were just talking. I am coming home right now. Put him on." Preston commanded, "Put the old man on the phone." Nia looked at me, her eyes pleading. She handed me the phone like it was a loaded gun. I took it. "Hello, Preston." "Listen to me, you senile old fool." Preston spat, his voice dripping with venom. "Stay away from my wife. Do not call her. Do not text her. Do not look at her. If I find out you have been anywhere near her again, I will not wait for a court order. I will call Dr. Vance and have you committed tonight. I will tell them you were violent. I will tell them you attacked her. Who do you think they will believe? The successful banker or the confused plumber with a history of outbursts?" I listened to his threats, and I felt a cold calm settle over me. He was using my own daughter as a weapon. He was threatening to lock me away to silence me. "You are scared, Preston," I said quietly. "I am not scared of you." He laughed a manic sound. "I own you, Luther. I own your daughter. I own your house. And soon, I will own your life. Now give the phone back to my wife and go home and wait for the men in white coats. Because if you push me one more inch, I will make sure you never see daylight again." I handed the phone back to Nia. She took it and ran out of the diner without looking back. I watched her get into her car and drive away, speeding as if she were fleeing a crime scene. I sat alone in the booth. The envelope full of evidence lay unopened on the table. It hadn't worked. The truth hadn't set her free, it had only tightened his grip. I realized then that I couldn't save Nia by talking. I couldn't reason with a victim who had fallen in love with her captor. I had to destroy him. I had to take away the only thing that gave him power over her. His money, his status, his illusion of success. I picked up the envelope. I didn't need Nia to believe me. I needed the law to bury him. Preston had threatened to put me in a mental institution. He had declared war on my freedom. I stood up and threw a $100 bill on the table. I walked out of the diner. I wasn't going home to wait for the doctors. I was going to the marina. It was time to call in the sharks. If Preston wanted to play the big man, I would show him what a real tycoon looked like when he took off the gloves. The plan to wake up Nia had failed. Now it was time for the plan to crush Preston. Sarah Jenkins sat behind her polished mahogany desk in her high-rise office overlooking the Miami skyline. She looked every inch the shark she was known to be. Across from her sat two men who looked like they had been carved out of granite. They were not businessmen. They were enforcers for the syndicate that held Preston's gambling debt. They looked uncomfortable in the sterile, air-conditioned environment of a top-tier law firm. But the cashier's check Sarah slid across the desk seemed to ease their tension. It was for $200,000. To me, it was a rounding error. To Preston, it was a death sentence. The men checked the amount, nodded once, and signed the assignment of debt agreement. With the stroke of a pen, the Russian mob was out, and I was in. Luther Banks, the plumber, the handyman, the nuisance, was now the sole owner of Preston Walsh's financial life. I stood in the corner of the room, hidden in the shadows of the blinds, watching the transaction. When the men left, Sarah looked at me and smiled a sharp, dangerous smile. She tapped the file on her desk. "We own him, Luther. He owes you $5 million, including the penalties and the vendor theft. We can foreclose on him today." I shook my head. "Not yet. I want him to feel the walls closing in. Send in the consultants." Preston was sitting in his rented office downtown trying to look busy. He was moving papers around his desk, pretending to analyze market trends. But I knew he was staring at his phone, waiting for a miracle that wasn't coming. He had no idea that his debt had been sold. He thought he was still dealing with street thugs who might break his legs. He didn't know he was now dealing with a man who wanted to break his spirit. The door to his office didn't open. It exploded inward. Two of my private security contractors walked in. They were large men dressed in cheap suits designed to look like low-level muscle. They didn't shout. They didn't scream. They brought a terrifying, professional silence into the room. Preston scrambled back in his chair, his eyes wide with panic. "Who are you?" he stammered. "I told you I would have the money by Friday." One of the men walked to the shelf displaying Preston's collection of sports memorabilia. He picked up a signed baseball bat, inspected it casually, and then smashed it violently against the glass coffee table. The sound of shattering glass filled the room. Preston shrieked, covering his head with his arms. "We are not here for the money," Preston, the man said, his voice calm and flat. "We know you do not have it. We ran your accounts. You are dry. You are nothing but a shell." Preston began to sob. "Please, I just need more time. My father-in-law, he has property. I am getting power of attorney." The second man leaned over the desk, invading Preston's personal space. He smelled of tobacco and menace. "We know about the property," the man lied, sticking to the script I had written. "We ran the title on the old man's house. It is sitting on a gold mine. We want that house, Preston. We do not want cash. We want the deed. Bring us the signed transfer of ownership for the bank's property, and we will wipe 20% of your debt and give you a 30-day extension on the rest." Preston looked up, hope warring with terror in his eyes. "You want the house. Just the house." "For now," the man said, straightening up. "But we need it today. Not next week. Today. If you do not have that paper signed by midnight, we are going to stop breaking furniture and start breaking fingers. Do you understand?" Preston nodded frantically. "Yes. Yes, I understand. I will get it. He is senile. He will sign anything. I will make him sign." The men turned and walked out, leaving Preston alone in the wreckage of his office. He sat there for a moment, hyperventilating. Then a look of dark resolve settled over his face. He wasn't thinking about Nia. He wasn't thinking about me. He was thinking about his own survival. He stood up and grabbed his laptop bag. He opened a drawer in his desk. He reached past the pens and the stapler to the back where he kept a metal lockbox. He keyed in the code. Inside, nestled on a bed of foam, was a snub-nosed .38 caliber revolver. It was unregistered, a relic he had bought years ago for home protection, he claimed. He checked the cylinder. It was loaded. He shoved the gun into the waistband of his trousers and pulled his blazer tight to cover it. He wasn't going to ask me to sign. He wasn't going to trick me. He was going to force me. The transition from fraud to violence was complete. He printed out a quitclaim deed form, his hands shaking so badly he smeared the ink. He grabbed a pen. He marched out of his office, his eyes dead and cold. He looked like a man walking to the gallows but willing to kill the executioner to save himself. He got into his car and drove toward my house. The sky had turned a bruised purple, threatening a storm. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating his pale, sweaty face. He rehearsed his lines in the car, screaming at the windshield. "Sign the paper, old man. Just sign the paper and nobody gets hurt." He was working himself up, justifying the violence he was about to commit. He told himself it was my fault. If I hadn't been so stubborn, if I had just died like a good father-in-law, he wouldn't have to do this. He convinced himself he was the victim. He pulled onto my street. The neighborhood was quiet. My house sat dark and silent at the end of the block. The oak tree in the front yard swayed in the wind, casting long skeletal shadows across the porch. It looked abandoned. It looked vulnerable. Preston parked his car 3 houses down, not wanting to alert the neighbors. He got out, feeling the weight of the gun against his hip. It gave him a false sense of power. He walked up the driveway, his footsteps heavy on the pavement. He didn't knock. He tried the handle. It was locked. He walked around to the back where the kitchen door was. He knew I sometimes left it unlocked for ventilation. He tried it. It opened with a creak. He stepped into the kitchen. The air was stale. The house felt empty. "Luther," he hissed, pulling the gun from his waistband. "Luther, come out here. I am done playing games." He moved through the kitchen into the hallway. The floorboards groaned under his weight. He pointed the gun at the shadows, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was terrified, but he was also dangerous. A rat in a corner will bite, and Preston was ready to tear my throat out to save his own skin. "Luther," he shouted louder this time, "get out here. I have the papers. You are going to sign them, and then I am going to leave. Do not make this difficult." He kicked open my bedroom door, gun raised, ready to fire. The room was empty. The bed was made perfectly, the sheets smooth and undisturbed. The closet door was open, revealing empty hangers. He frowned. He checked the bathroom. Dry. Empty. He checked the guest room. Nothing. Panic began to set in. Where was I? I was supposed to be here, waiting to be victimized. He ran back to the living room. It was then that he noticed the changes. The photos on the mantel were gone. The small personal items, Beatrice S. Vaz, my favorite books, were missing. The house wasn't just empty, it had been scrubbed. He stood in the center of the living room, spinning in a circle, the gun hanging uselessly at his side. He was alone. The silence of the house pressed in on him, mocking him. He had come to commit a crime, but the victim had vanished. "Where are you?" he screamed at the walls. "Where did you go, you old ghost?" He didn't know that I was watching him. I was 5 miles away in the penthouse suite of the Four Seasons, sitting in a leather chair with a glass of aged bourbon in my hand. On the large screen television mounted on the wall, a live feed from the hidden cameras I had installed in my house played in high definition. I watched him wave the gun. I watched him sweat. I watched him realize that his plan B had just evaporated into thin air. He was trapped in a house that wasn't his, looking for a man who didn't exist anymore. The plumber was gone. The handyman had retired. The only thing left in that house was a ghost, and ghosts are very hard to kill with a gun. Preston collapsed onto my old sofa, his head in his hands. He didn't know what to do. The loan sharks wanted the deed by midnight. He couldn't get the deed if he couldn't find the owner. He was running out of time, and the walls were closing in. I took a sip of my drink. It was smooth and warm. The show was just getting started. He thought he was the hunter, but he was just a rat in a maze, and I had just moved the cheese. I picked up my phone. It was time to give him a little nudge. It was time to send him an invitation to the one place he couldn't resist: the gala. The silence inside the house was heavy and oppressive, pressing down on Preston like a physical weight. I watched on the high-definition monitor in my hotel suite as he stood in the center of the living room, spinning in slow circles. The gun hung loosely in his hand, pointing aimlessly at the floorboards. He looked like a man who had stepped off a ledge expecting a net only to find empty air. He had kicked open the bedroom door, ready to commit a felony, ready to threaten an old man into signing away his life, but there was nobody to threaten. The bed was stripped to the mattress. The closets were gaping maws of darkness, void of clothes. The personal clutter that makes a house a home, the stacks of magazines, the half-finished crossword puzzles, the smell of old coffee. It was all gone. I had spent the previous night with a professional cleaning crew scrubbing the place down to the studs. I wanted him to walk into a ghost house. I wanted him to feel the chill of absolute abandonment. Preston let out a scream of frustration that distorted the audio on my feed. He holstered the gun and began to tear the room apart. He wasn't looking for me anymore. He was looking for anything of value, anything he could pawn to buy himself another 24 hours of life. He ripped the cushions off the sofa, searching for loose change or forgotten jewelry. He pulled the drawers out of the sideboard, dumping old batteries and rubber bands onto the floor. He was frantic, sweating through his expensive shirt, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. He ran to the kitchen. I saw him open the refrigerator. It was empty, except for a single box of baking soda. He slammed the door so hard a magnet fell off and skittered across the linoleum. He was realizing that the resource he had counted on, the Bank of Luther, was closed for business. He marched back into the hallway and kicked the door to my study. The wood splintered. This was where he expected to find the paperwork. He went straight to the old roll-top desk Beatrice had bought me for our 20th anniversary. It was locked. He didn't bother looking for a key. He grabbed a heavy brass lamp from the floor and smashed it against the locking mechanism. Once, twice, 3 times until the wood gave way. He threw the roll-top back and began frantically shuffling through the empty slots. He was looking for the deed. He was looking for the title. He needed proof of ownership to forge a transfer. He froze. His hand dived into the back of the central drawer and pulled out a single thick envelope. I had left it there on purpose. It was the cheese in the mousetrap. He tore it open, his hands shaking so badly he ripped the paper. He pulled out the document inside. It was a legal notice printed on heavy bond paper with a blue cover sheet. He scanned it, his eyes widening. He thought he had found the deed. He thought he had won. But then his expression changed. Confusion clouded his face. He read the document again, slower this time, moving his lips like a child learning to read. It was not a deed. It was a notice of encumbrance. It was a legal declaration that the property located at this address was currently held as collateral against a commercial loan. The lien holder was listed in bold black letters at the top of the page. Banks Holdings, LLC. Preston stared at the name. Banks. He blinked. He looked around the room as if asking the empty walls for an explanation. To him, the word banks was just a generic financial term. It sounded like a corporate monolith, a faceless entity that owned half the city. He did not make the connection. He did not see the irony. He did not realize that the man he called a plumber, the man he refused to let sit on his leather seats, shared the same name as the company that now owned the roof over his head. He thought I had mortgaged the house to some investment firm. He thought I was broke, just like him. He threw the document across the room. It fluttered to the floor, landing face up. Banks Holdings. The name mocked him. He screamed again, a raw, guttural sound of pure despair. He couldn't sell the house. He couldn't transfer the title. The property was locked down tight by a lien that exceeded its market value. The equity he had planned to steal had evaporated. He was standing in a worthless shell. The loan sharks would not accept a house with a lien on it. They wanted clean assets, and Preston had nothing. He collapsed onto the floor, his back against the desk. He pulled his knees to his chest. He looked small. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrifying certainty of his own destruction. He checked his watch. It was 5 in the afternoon. He had 7 hours before the deadline, 7 hours before the men who had visited his office returned to collect payment in blood. He put his head in his hands and began to rock back and forth. He was broken. Then a chime cut through the silence. It was his phone. He ignored it. It chimed again and again. A persistent, demanding notification tone. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out the device. He looked at the screen with dull eyes, expecting a threat from a debt collector or a screaming text from Nia. But it wasn't a threat. I watched his face transform. His eyes widened. His mouth opened slightly. He sat up straighter. He tapped the screen, scrolling down. I knew exactly what he was looking at because I had instructed my executive assistant to send it 5 minutes ago. It was an email. The subject line read, VIP Guest List Invitation Miami Business Gala. Preston stood up. He held the phone up to the light as if it were a holy relic. He read the email aloud, his voice cracking with disbelief. Due to a last-minute cancellation, we are extending a priority invitation to Mr. Preston Walsh of PW Ventures. It was a lie, of course. PW Ventures was a joke. But Preston didn't see the lie. He saw a lifeline. The Miami Business Gala was the event of the season. It was where the real money in Florida gathered. Billionaires, venture capitalists, hedge fund managers. People who wrote million-dollar checks as easily as buying a cup of coffee. Preston's delusional mind immediately began to spin a new narrative. He wasn't a failure. He was a player who had just been invited to the big leagues. He convinced himself that he could go there, charm a wealthy investor, pitch his non-existent business model, and secure a bridge loan that would pay off the sharks and save his skin. He laughed. It was a manic, high-pitched sound that bounced off the empty walls. "I can do this," he whispered to himself. "I just need one investor. Just one." He holstered the gun. He smoothed his hair back. He looked at his reflection in the dark window of the study. He adjusted his tie. The fear was still there, lurking behind his eyes, but he had plastered a layer of desperate false confidence over it. He believed he could talk his way out of this. He believed his own hype. He rushed out of the room, leaving the lean document on the floor. He ran through the house and out the back door, leaving it wide open. He didn't care about the house anymore. He had a bigger target. He hurried down the driveway to his car. I watched him drive away, speeding down the street toward his apartment. He needed to change. He needed to put on his costume. He was going to the ball. I turned off the monitor and finished my drink. He was running straight into the lioness den. He thought the gala was his salvation. He didn't know that Banks Holdings LLC was the primary sponsor. He didn't know that the host of the evening, the man who would be standing on the stage, was the same man whose house he had just broken into. He was coming to my party, and I was going to make sure it was a night he would never forget. I stood up and walked to the closet where my tuxedo hung. It was a bespoke piece tailored in London. It cost $12,000. It was time for the plumber to get dressed. Preston Walsh arrived at the grand ballroom of the Mandarin Oriental looking like $1 million he did not have. He had pawned his mistress's earrings earlier that afternoon to secure the rental fee for a midnight blue tuxedo that fit him poorly around the shoulders. I watched from the mezzanine level, hidden behind the heavy velvet curtains of the VIP balcony. Beside him walked my daughter, Nia. She wore a dress she had pulled from the back of her closet, a simple black gown that she used to wear to charity events before Preston drained her spirit. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying, but Preston gripped her elbow with a force that turned his knuckles white, steering her toward the red carpet like a prop in his stage play. "Smile," he hissed at her, his voice carrying up to the high-definition microphone I had planted near the entrance. "This is it, Nia. This is the night everything changes. You need to look the part of the supportive wife. Do not embarrass me." Nia tried to pull away, but he tightened his grip. He flashed his teeth at the photographers who were there to capture the arrival of Miami's elite. They didn't know who he was. They didn't care. But Preston preened for the cameras anyway, convinced that his presence alone was news. He handed his invitation to the doorman with a flourish, acting as if he were doing the gala a favor by attending. The doorman scanned the QR code. There was a beep. The light turned green. Preston let out a breath he had been holding, his shoulders sagging slightly in relief. He was in. He thought he had fooled the system. He didn't know that I had personally instructed security to let the fox into the henhouse. I wanted him inside. I wanted him trapped where he couldn't run. The ballroom was a sea of diamonds and sharks. The air conditioning was set to a crisp 68 degrees, but Preston was sweating within 5 minutes. He left Nia standing by a pillar holding a glass of sparkling water she didn't drink and dove into the crowd. He was hunting. He needed a bridge loan. He needed a savior. I watched him target Arthur Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Venture Capital. Arthur was a man who had started as a dock worker in the 70s. We had done business for 30 years. Preston approached him with his hand extended, his smile plastered on like a mask. "Mr. Sterling," Preston said, his voice too loud, too eager. "Preston Walsh, PW Ventures. We met briefly at the Yacht Club last month. I have an opportunity that fits your portfolio perfectly." Arthur looked at Preston's hand. He didn't shake it. He looked at Preston's face, then down at his cheap shoes. "I know who you are, Mr. Walsh," Arthur said, his voice cutting through the ambient noise like a razor. "And I know about your liquidity issues. PW Ventures is flagged in our system as a high-risk entity. Do not approach me again." Arthur turned his back and walked away, leaving Preston standing there with his hands still extended, his smile faltering. I took a sip of my sparkling water. I had sent a memo to every major financial player in the room that morning. The subject line was simple: Due Diligence Advisory, Preston Walsh. Attached was a summary of his debts, his vendor theft, and his pending lawsuits. He was radioactive and he didn't even know it. He tried again. He cornered Michael Chang, a real estate mogul, near the buffet. Michael listened for 10 seconds before laughing in Preston's face. "You want an unsecured loan for a business with no assets?" Michael asked, incredulous. "Son, you are at the wrong party. The charity kitchen is downtown." Preston reeled back as if he had been slapped. His desperation was mutating into panic. He looked around the room, searching for a friendly face, but there were none. The room had turned its back on him. He was a ghost walking among the living. He retreated to the bar, downing a scotch in one gulp. He looked at Nia, who was staring at the floor. He blamed her. I could see it in his eyes. He marched over to her, gripping her arm again. "You are not mingling," he whispered harshly. "Go talk to the wives. Find out who holds the checkbooks. Make yourself useful." Nia looked at him with dead eyes. "I want to go home, Preston. This is a mistake. There is no home to go to," he snarled. "If I do not walk out of here with a check, we are dead. Do you understand? Dead." Suddenly the chandeliers dimmed. The murmur of the crowd died down, replaced by a hushed anticipation. A single bright spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the center stage. The orchestra stopped playing. A heavy silence fell over the room. Preston froze. He looked at the stage, hope rekindling in his eyes. He thought this was his moment. He thought he could corner the host after the speech. He straightened his tie, wiping the sweat from his upper lip. He pulled Nia closer, using her as a shield, as a prop. The master of ceremonies walked to the microphone. He was a tall man with a deep, resonant voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "thank you for joining us tonight. We are gathered here not just to celebrate a year of record profits, but to honor the man who built this city's shipping infrastructure from the ground up. A man who has operated in the shadows for decades, letting his work speak for itself." Preston leaned forward. He whispered to Nia, "This is it, the mystery investor. If I can just get 5 minutes with him, I can sell him the vision. He loves infrastructure. I can pivot the pitch." He was delusional. He was manic. He was talking about pitching a man whose house he had broken into 5 hours ago. The MC continued. "He is a man of humble beginnings, a man who knows the value of hard work, a man who believes that integrity is the only currency that matters. Please welcome the founder and chairman of Banks Logistics." Preston clapped. He clapped harder than anyone else, trying to be seen, trying to be part of the club. He heard the name Banks, and his mind didn't even stutter. He didn't connect Banks Logistics to Luther Banks. To him, Banks was just a name on a foreclosure notice. To him, Luther was just a first name attached to a plunger. He was so blinded by his own prejudice, so convinced of his own superiority, that he couldn't imagine a world where the help sat on the throne. The curtain behind the podium began to rise. The crowd rose to their feet in a standing ovation. Preston stood up too, dragging Nia with him. He stood on his tiptoes, craning his neck, desperate to see the face of his salvation. I took a deep breath. I set my glass down on the table in the VIP booth. I buttoned my tuxedo jacket. I walked out from behind the curtain and stepped into the light. The heavy velvet curtains parted slowly, revealing the stage bathed in a brilliant white light. I stepped forward. I did not shuffle. I did not look down at my feet. I walked with the stride of a man who has conquered oceans. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the collective intake of breath from 500 of Miami's most powerful people. I was not wearing my flannel shirt. I was not wearing my work boots. I was dressed in a bespoke tuxedo cut from Italian wool that draped perfectly over my broad shoulders. My shoes were polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the stage lights. My beard was trimmed, my hair groomed. I stood at the podium, gripping the sides with my large, calloused hands. But tonight those calloused hands did not look like the hands of a laborer. They looked like the hands of a builder, a creator, a king. I looked out into the sea of faces. I saw the recognition dawn on them. These were men and women I had done business with for decades behind the scenes through intermediaries or over encrypted calls. They knew the name Banks. Now they knew the face. And then my eyes found him. Preston Walsh. He was standing near the front row, frozen in place. His mouth was slightly open, his eyes wide and unblinking. He looked like a man who had just seen a corpse rise from the grave. Beside him, Nia covered her mouth with her hand. She wasn't looking at my suit, she was looking at my eyes. She saw the fire there. She saw the intelligence I had hidden to protect her. She saw her father for the first time in years. I leaned into the microphone. The sound of my breath echoed through the ballroom. "Good evening," I said. My voice was deep, resonant, and commanding. It was not the voice of the confused old man who asked for pizza. It was the voice of the chairman. Preston stumbled back a step, bumping into a waiter. He rubbed his eyes violently as if trying to wipe away a hallucination. He grabbed Nia's arm, shaking her. "Is that him?" he whispered loudly enough for the people around him to hear. "Is that the plumber? Why is the plumber on stage?" He was spiraling. His brain could not reconcile the two realities. The man he had abused and the man who owned the room could not be the same person. It broke his worldview. I let my gaze sweep across the room until it locked onto Preston. I did not blink. I did not look away. I pinned him there with my stare like a butterfly on a corkboard. "There are those among us," I began, my voice steady, "who believe that value is something you wear. They believe that a man's worth is stitched into the lining of a rented tuxedo or stamped on the face of a counterfeit watch. They judge a book not by its cover, but by the dust on its jacket. They see dirt under a fingernail and assume it means poverty. They do not understand that dirt is often the residue of building something real." The crowd nodded, murmuring their agreement. They were self-made men and women. They understood. Preston turned pale. He knew I was talking to him. He knew I was stripping him naked in front of the very people he wanted to impress. I continued, my voice rising. "I have spent my life building foundations. I have laid pipe. I have poured concrete. I have steered ships through storms that would break lesser men. And I have learned one thing. A leak in a pipe is easy to fix. You just need a wrench and some effort. But a leak in a man's character, that is fatal. There is no tool in my box that can fix a soul that is rotted by greed and arrogance." Nia was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. She understood. She heard the apology in my voice for hiding my true self, but she also heard the judgment I was passing on her husband. Preston looked like he wanted to run, but he was trapped by the crowd, trapped by the spotlight, trapped by the truth. He stood there shivering in his cheap suit while the plumber he despised held the world in his hands. Tonight, I concluded, I am not here just to accept an award. I am here to announce the future of Banks Logistics. For 40 years, we have moved cargo across the globe. We have been the invisible veins of this economy, but it is time to step into the light. It is time to show the world what we have built. I gestured to the massive screen behind me. An image appeared. It was a live feed of the harbor. In the center of the frame, illuminated by floodlights, sat the super yacht, the Black Pearl. Preston gasped. It was the boat where he had thrown his party, the boat where he had humiliated me. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, a small smile playing on my lips, "I invite you all to join me for the after-party aboard my new flagship vessel, the Black Pearl. It is not just a yacht. It is the new mobile headquarters for our international operations. And I assure you the plumbing is in excellent condition because I fixed it myself." The room erupted. Thunderous applause shook the walls. The orchestra struck up a triumphant fanfare. I stepped back from the podium, soaking it in. I saw Preston staring at the screen. He looked at the yacht. He looked at me. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. He had kicked the owner off his own boat. He had slandered me on the very deck I had paid for. I walked down the steps of the stage, moving directly toward him. The crowd parted for me. I stopped inches from his face. He smelled of fear and cheap scotch. "Hello, Preston," I said softly, so only he and Nia could hear. "You wanted an investor. You wanted to pitch the big man. Well, here I am. I am the big man, and I am inviting you onto my boat. Do not be late. We have a lot to discuss." I walked past him, leaving him trembling in my wake. He didn't know that the boat wasn't a party venue for him. It was a courtroom, and the trial was about to begin. The gangway to the Black Pearl was choked with the elite of Miami, all clamoring to get aboard the vessel of the mystery billionaire. I stood on the upper observation deck, looking down at the chaos like a captain watching a storm roll in. Amidst the sea of tuxedos and designer gowns, I spotted a frantic figure pushing and shoving his way through the crowd. It was Preston Walsh. Just minutes ago, he had been a trembling wreck in the ballroom, but now, seeing the yacht and connecting the dots, he had undergone a miraculous and sickening transformation. His fear had been replaced by a manic, opportunistic energy. He was using his elbows to clear a path, dragging my daughter Nia behind him like a piece of luggage he needed to check in. "Move," he shouted at a bank executive twice his size. "Let us through. We are family. That is my father-in-law up there." He was shouting it to anyone who would listen. He was desperate to reclaim his proximity to power. He grabbed the arm of the security officer at the base of the ramp, the same man who had been instructed to let him pass. "Do you know who I am?" Preston demanded, his voice cracking with adrenaline. "I am Luther Banks' son-in-law. I knew about this whole thing. It was a secret we kept. I told you he was successful. I told everyone. He was rewriting history in real time. He was gaslighting the entire world." He looked back at the people he had just been trying to beg money from and flashed them a wide, arrogant grin. You see, he yelled over his shoulder, "I told you big things were coming. I told you I had backing. You should have taken my offer when you had the chance." Nia looked mortified. She tried to pull her hand away, but he held on tight. He needed her. She was his ticket past the velvet rope. He smoothed the lapels of his cheap rental tuxedo and marched up the gangway with his chest puffed out. He wasn't walking like a man who had just been exposed as a fraud. He was walking like a prince returning to his castle. He actually believed that because he had married my daughter, he was entitled to my empire. He believed that my revelation on stage was just a dramatic flair and that behind closed doors we were still partners. His delusion was absolute. He stepped onto the main deck, his eyes darting around greedily, taking in the polished chrome, the white leather furniture, and the uniformed staff passing out champagne. He looked up, saw me standing on the balcony, and waved frantically. "Dad," he shouted, waving both arms. "Up here. We made it. What a performance. You really had them going." I stared down at him, my face a mask of stone. I didn't wave back. I simply turned and walked toward the spiral staircase that led down to the main deck. It was time to welcome my special guest. I met him near the wet bar. The crowd had parted, creating a circle around us, sensing the tension radiating from me. Preston rushed forward, his arms open, ready to embrace the man he had called a plumber just 24 hours ago. "Luther," he breathed out, grinning like a shark. "You old fox. I knew you had it in you. I knew you were hiding something, but this is magnificent. We are going to rule this city." He reached out to clap me on the shoulder. I didn't move, but I didn't need to. My head of security, a man named Marcus, who used to be a Navy SEAL, stepped in between us. He didn't touch Preston, he just occupied the space, radiating a silent threat that made Preston freeze mid-step. I stepped around Marcus and walked over to the bar. I rested my hand on the brass faucet. It was the same faucet I had fixed, the same spot where Preston had humiliated me. The metal was cold under my palm. I looked at Preston. "Come here, Preston," I said, my voice low and smooth, cutting through the ambient chatter of the party. Preston laughed nervously, adjusting his cuffs. "Sure, Dad. Anything. What do you need?" "A drink. Let me get you a drink. We should celebrate." He walked over to the bar, standing on the other side of the counter. He leaned in, trying to create an intimacy that didn't exist. I tapped the faucet with my index finger. "Do you remember this?" I asked. Preston blinked. He looked at the tap, then at me. A flicker of unease crossed his face, but he buried it quickly under layers of denial. "The sink," he said with a forced chuckle. "Yeah, you fixed it. Good job. I was just telling Arthur Sterling how handy you are. I said my father-in-law can fix anything. He is a man of many talents." "You said plumbers have no place here," I corrected him, my voice devoid of emotion. "You said I looked like a drowned rat. You told me to wait in the car because I was ruining the aesthetic of your party." Preston waved his hand dismissively as if he were swatting away a fly. "Oh, come on, Luther. That was just banter. You know how I get when I'm stressed. I was protecting your cover. I didn't want anyone to know you were the owner until you were ready to reveal it. I was playing along. I was helping you." He was lying so effortlessly it was almost impressive. He truly believed he could talk his way out of gravity. He thought words were magic spells that could alter reality. You threw a rag at me, I continued relentless. You looked at me with disgust. You treated me like something you scraped off your shoe. And you did it on my boat, on my deck. Preston's smile faltered. Beads of sweat began to form on his hairline. Look, Dad let us not dwell on the past. We have a future to plan. With your capital and my vision, we can turn PW Ventures into a global powerhouse. I have ideas, Luther. Big ideas. I reached under the bar and pulled out a thick black file folder. I dropped it onto the marble counter with a heavy thud. I do not need your ideas, Preston, I said. I need my money. Preston looked at the file. He recognized the logo on the cover. It was the logo of the holding company that had bought his debt. His face went slack. The color drained out of his cheeks, leaving him looking like wet dough. You, he whispered. You bought the debt. I bought it all, I said, leaning forward. The gambling debts, the vendor theft, the second mortgage you forged Naya's signature on. I own every cent of your failure, Preston, and I am calling it in. The reality finally crashed down on him. The gala, the invitation, the yacht. It wasn't a celebration, it was a trap. He wasn't a guest, he was the main course. His legs gave out, he didn't stagger, he collapsed. He dropped to his knees on the expensive teak deck, the same deck he hadn't wanted me to walk on. He grabbed the hem of my tuxedo trousers, his hands shaking violently. Dad, please. He begged, his voice high and thin like a child S. I know this was a test. You were testing me, right? You wanted to see if I was tough enough to handle the business. I failed. I know I failed. But I learned. I swear to God, I learned. He was crying now, ugly snot-filled sobs that echoed in the silence of the watching crowd. Nia stood a few feet away, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with horror and realization. She was seeing him for the first time, not as a husband, but as a coward. Please, Luther. Preston blubbered, trying to kiss my shoe. We are family. You cannot destroy family. I will change. I will do anything. Just do not ruin me. I am the father of your future grandchildren. I looked down at him. I looked at the man who had wished for my death so he could sell my house. I looked at the man who had abused my daughter's trust and stolen her mother's jewelry. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no anger. Just the cold clinical detachment of a surgeon removing a tumor. I pulled my leg back, breaking his grip. I lifted my foot and shoved his shoulder, not hard enough to hurt him, but hard enough to knock him backward onto his backside. Get your hands off me, I said, my voice booming across the deck. Do not touch me. Do not touch my suit. And do not touch my deck. Your hands are too dirty, Preston. They are covered in greed and they are covered in lies. I turned to the crowd, addressing the hundreds of witnesses. This man is not my partner, I declared. He is a thief, and he is trespassing on private property. Preston scrambled backward, crab walking away from me, his eyes darting around, looking for an exit that didn't exist. He was trapped between the billionaire he had scorned and the deep blue sea, and the sharks were circling. I did not waste my breath debating with a man who had no honor. Preston was on his knees, blubbering lies about family and redemption, but I knew that words would not pierce the thick armor of his narcissism. He needed to see his own soul projected in high definition. I raised my hand, signaling the audio-visual technician in the control booth above. The massive LED screen behind the bar, which had been displaying the bank's logistics logo, flickered. The image dissolved into static for a split second before resolving into a grainy but crystal-clear video feed. It was the footage from the hidden camera I had installed in Preston's home office. The timestamp in the corner read, Tuesday 11:14 a.m. The audio boomed over the yacht's state-of-the-art sound system, cutting through the night air like a thunderclap. Every guest on the deck turned to watch. Preston stopped crying. He looked up at the screen, his eyes bulging as he saw himself sitting at his desk, holding a glass of scotch with his mistress perched on the edge. The dialogue played out with sickening clarity. I listened as the digital Preston laughed about sending Naya to the accountant on a wild goose chase. I listened as he called her gullible and pathetic. The crowd gasped. A ripple of shock went through the elite of Miami as they witnessed the private cruelty of the man who had tried to charm them just hours before. But the worst was yet to come. The video cut to the moment Preston slammed his glass down. His voice echoed across the water, amplified 1,000 times. Who cares what he needs? He sneered on screen. He is useless. He is just taking up space. Honestly, if the shock of moving him kills him, it would be a mercy. The real Preston knelt on the deck, frozen in horror as his own voice condemned him. On the screen, he continued, "If the old man dies early, I am relieved. I do not have to pay for a nursing home and I get the house free and clear. I just need to sell that ratted-out shack and I am back in the black." I looked at Nia. She was standing perfectly still, her eyes locked onto the screen. She wasn't crying anymore. The tears had dried up, replaced by a look of absolute devastation. She was watching the man she had defended for 5 years, the man she had fought with me over the man she had mortgaged her future for, wish for her father's death. She saw the casual cruelty in his eyes. She heard the laughter of the mistress she had suspected but never wanted to confirm. The illusion she had built her life around didn't just crack, it shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The video ended, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Preston scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of panic. He looked at the crowd, then at me, and finally at Nia. "Nia, baby, listen to me," he stammered, reaching out to her. "That is not real. It is a deep fake. You know what technology is like these days. Your father made it up. He hired people to create it. He is trying to frame me. He was desperate, flailing, drowning in his own lies." But Nia wasn't listening to his words anymore. She was looking at his hands, the hands that had smashed her jewelry box, the hands that had pushed her, the hands that had taken everything from her. She took a step toward him. Her movement was slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly calm. "You wanted him to die," she whispered, her voice carrying in the silence. "You wanted my father dead so you could pay off your bookie." Preston tried to grab her shoulders. "No, Nia. I was just talking. It was stress. I didn't mean it. I love you. I did it all for us." "For us?" she repeated, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "There is no us, Preston. There never was. There was just you and the money you thought you could squeeze out of me." She stepped into his space. He looked down at her, thinking he could intimidate her one last time, thinking he could use his physical presence to cow her into submission. He opened his mouth to lie again, to spin another web, but Nia didn't let him speak. She drew her hand back and swung. It wasn't a slap of hysteria. It was a slap of judgment. Her palm connected with his cheek with a force that rocked his head back. It was the sound of 5 years of gaslighting coming to an abrupt, violent end. The crowd murmured. Preston stumbled back, clutching his face. The shock in his eyes quickly turned to a dark, primal rage. The mask of the sophisticated banker fell away completely, revealing the abuser beneath. He bared his teeth like a cornered animal. "You ungrateful little witch!" he roared, raising his fist. "After everything I did for you, you are nothing without me. I made you." He lunged at her, his arm drawn back, ready to strike her down in front of everyone. He didn't care about the witnesses anymore. He just wanted to hurt the thing that had defied him. Nia flinched, bracing for the blow, but it never landed. 2 massive figures stepped out from the shadows of the bar. They moved with a speed that belied their size. One of them caught Preston's wrist in midair, twisting it behind his back until Preston screamed in agony. The other kicked the back of his knee, sending him crashing face first onto the hard teak deck. Preston writhed on the floor, pinned down by a knee to his spine. He looked up at the men who held him. Recognition dawned in his eyes. These were not Yacht security. These were the same men who had walked into his office 2 days ago, the same men who had smashed his baseball bat, the same men he thought were enforcers for the Russian mob. "Let me go!" he shrieked. "You work for the syndicate! You cannot touch me here! I have rights!" I walked over and stood above him, looking down at his squashed face. "They do not work for the syndicate, Preston," I said calmly. "They work for me. They have been on my payroll for 10 years. They are my head of security." Preston's eyes went wide as he processed the final layer of the trap. The loan sharks, the threats, the demand for the deed. It had all been me. I had been the invisible hand guiding him toward his own destruction every step of the way. "You," he wheezed. "It was you the whole time. Every step I confirmed. I bought your debt because I wanted to own you. I sent them to your office because I wanted to see how far you would go. And you went all the way, Preston. You broke into my house. You tried to steal my home. You wished for my death. And you tried to hit my daughter." I signaled to my men. "Get him up." They hauled him to his feet, his arms wrenched painfully behind his back. He hung there limp and defeated, stripped of his dignity, his lies, and his power. He looked at Nia one last time, pleading with his eyes, but she turned her back on him. She walked over to me and stood by my side, her head high. She was no longer his victim. She was a bank's. And we were done playing games. The silence on the deck was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic lapping of the harbor water against the hull of the Black Pearl. Preston Walsh stood held fast by my security team, his face a mask of confusion and terror. He was waiting for the punchline. He was waiting for me to tell him this was all a cruel joke, a test of his character that he had failed but could still recover from. But there was no joke. There was only the law. From the shadows of the upper deck, Sarah Jenkins descended the spiral staircase. She did not walk like a guest at a party. She walked like an executioner approaching the scaffold. Her heels clicked sharply on the teak steps, a metronome counting down the seconds of Preston S. life as he knew it. She held a thick leather binder in her hands. She stopped beside me and opened it. She did not look at Preston. She looked at the crowd, addressing the hundreds of witnesses who were clinging to every moment of this spectacle. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah announced, her voice projecting clearly without a microphone. "My client, Mr. Luther Banks, has authorized me to execute a writ of immediate asset recovery. We have obtained an emergency court order signed by a judge 20 minutes ago, granting us the right to seize all collateral tied to the defaulted loans of Mr. Preston Walsh and his shell company PW Ventures." Preston squirmed in the grip of the guards. "What collateral?" he spat, trying to muster a shred of his old arrogance. "I do not have any collateral. I rented everything. I own nothing you can take." Sarah turned to him slowly. She adjusted her glasses and looked him up and down with clinical detachment. "You are correct, Mr. Walsh. You own nothing, but you are in possession of stolen property. And under the terms of the debt acquisition agreement which you signed with your previous lenders, all assets in your physical possession are subject to immediate seizure to offset the $5 million liability." She flipped a page in the binder. Item 1. The vehicle. A black Mercedes-Benz S-Class currently parked in the VIP lot of this marina. License plate number PWV1. Preston laughed, a desperate, high-pitched sound. "It is a rental. You cannot seize a rental car. Hertz owns it." Sarah shook her head. "Incorrect. You leased it through a corporate account linked to PW Ventures. But you stopped making payments 6 months ago. The leasing company sold the bad debt and the title to a recovery agency this morning. That agency is a subsidiary of Banks Logistics. That car belongs to us, and we are taking it back." I nodded to Marcus, my head of security. "Have the valet bring the keys, and tow it. I want it crushed." Preston's eyes went wide. "You cannot crush a $100,000 car." "It is my car, Preston," I said coldly. "I can turn it into a paperweight if I want to." Sarah continued, relentless. Item 2, the residential property, penthouse 4B at the Biscayne Bay Towers. Preston struggled harder. "That is my apartment. My name is on the lease. Nia lives there. You cannot throw us out." "We are not throwing Nia out," I corrected him. "She is welcome to stay in any property I own. But you, Preston, you are trespassing." Sarah explained the mortgage. Sarah held up a document. "You took out a second mortgage on the property using forged documents to pay your gambling debts. When you defaulted, the primary lender initiated foreclosure proceedings. Mr. Banks purchased the note an hour ago. He has exercised his right to accelerate the foreclosure due to fraud. The locks are being changed as we speak. Your key card has been deactivated. Everything inside that apartment now belongs to the bank. And the bank is standing right in front of you." Preston looked at me, his face draining of color. He was homeless. He was carless, but he still had his pride. He straightened his spine, trying to look dignified in his tuxedo. "Fine," he sneered. "Take the car. Take the apartment. I do not need your charity. I will walk out of here. I will rebuild. I have my reputation. And I have my clothes." I stepped forward. I looked at the midnight blue tuxedo he was wearing. It was the only thing making him look like he belonged on this yacht. It was his armor. "About that," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "Sarah, item 3. Sarah flipped to the final page. Item 3. Personal effects. Specifically, 1 midnight blue bespoke tuxedo tailored by Ricciardi of Miami. Purchase price $3,200. Charged to a supplemental credit card issued to Nia Walsh." Preston scoffed. "So what? My wife bought me a suit. That is not a crime." "It is when the credit card bill is paid by a trust fund that explicitly forbids the use of funds for anyone other than the beneficiary," Sarah stated. "By using Nia S. card, which is funded by her father to buy clothes for yourself without authorization, you committed theft by conversion. That suit was bought with stolen money. It is the property of the trust. I looked Preston in the eye. Take it off. The crowd gasped. A ripple of shock went through the deck. Preston froze. What he whispered. You heard me. I said loud enough for the people in the back to hear. That suit belongs to me. Those shoes belong to me. That watch on your wrist, which I know is a fake, but was bought with my money, belongs to me. Take it all off, Preston, right now. He looked around the circle of faces. He saw the bankers he wanted to impress. He saw the women he wanted to charm. He saw the socialites he wanted to be accepted by. They were all watching, waiting. You cannot be serious, Preston stammered, clutching his lapels. You want me to strip? Here, in front of everyone. You have two choices, I said, holding up two fingers. Choice 1, you strip down to your underwear, hand over my property, and walk off this boat. Choice 2, my security team removes the property for you. And I promise you they will not be gentle about it. They will cut it off you, and they might take a little skin with it. Preston looked at Marcus. Marcus cracked his knuckles, a sound like gunshots in the quiet night. He looked at the other guards. They were ready. They were waiting for the signal. Preston began to shake. Tears of humiliation welled up in his eyes. He looked at Nia, begging her to intervene. Nia, please, he whimpered. Do not let him do this. Nia crossed her arms over her chest. She looked at him with eyes that were harder than diamonds. You stole my mother's necklace, Preston. You stole 5 years of my life. Give him the suit. Defeated, broken, and utterly alone, Preston reached for his bow tie. His hands trembled so badly he couldn't undo the knot. He yanked it off, tearing the fabric. He threw it on the deck. Then he unbuttoned the jacket. He let it slide off his shoulders. It fell into a puddle of spilled champagne. Faster, I commanded. He kicked off the shoes. He unbuckled the belt. He unzipped the trousers. He stepped out of them, tripping slightly in his haste. He unbuttoned the shirt, revealing his pale, sweating chest. He stripped off the socks. There he stood, in the middle of the most exclusive party in Miami, surrounded by billionaires and captains of industry. Preston Walsh stood in a pair of gray boxer briefs, shivering in the night air. He wrapped his arms around himself, trying to hide his body, trying to hide his shame. The crowd didn't gasp this time. They laughed. It started as a titter in the back, then a chuckle, then a roar. They were laughing at the emperor who had no clothes. They were laughing at the fraud who had tried to trick them. They took out their phones. Flashes went off. He was being documented. He was being memified. This moment would live on the internet forever. I signaled to Marcus. Marcus picked up the pile of clothes. He checked the pockets. He pulled out the wallet and the phone. Keep the phone, I said. I want him to be able to call his mother to pick him up. But keep the wallet. That leather was expensive. Marcus tossed the phone at Preston's feet. It skidded across the deck. Preston scrambled for it, clutching it like a lifeline. Now get off my boat, I said, my voice booming. Preston turned and ran. He ran barefoot across the teak deck. He ran down the gangway. He ran past the security guards who were trying to suppress their laughter. He ran into the dark parking lot, a pale ghost vanishing into the night. I watched him go. I felt a hand on my arm. It was Nia. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at me. Is it over? She asked. Not yet, I said, watching the blue lights of police cruisers turning into the marina entrance. That was just the eviction. Now comes the judgment. The night air was suddenly shattered by a cacophony of sirens that wailed like banshees, mourning the death of Preston Walsh's freedom. From the deck of the Black Pearl, I watched as the parking lot transformed into a sea of flashing red and blue strobe lights. Preston, who had been sprinting toward the exit with the desperate energy of a cornered rat, skidded to a halt on the asphalt. He was barefoot, shivering in his gray boxer briefs and clutching his phone like a talisman, but his path was blocked by a wall of law enforcement vehicles. It wasn't just a patrol car or two. It was a coordinated raid. Unmarked black SUVs with grille lights flashing sat alongside Miami-Dade police cruisers. Men and women in windbreakers emblazoned with yellow letters stepped out into the humid night. FBI, Economic Crimes Unit, IRS Criminal Investigation Division. They moved with the synchronized precision of a pack of wolves taking down a wounded deer. They didn't draw weapons, but they didn't need to. Their presence alone was a suffocating weight. Preston looked back at the yacht, then at the wall of agents. He was trapped between the humiliation he had just fled and the incarceration he was about to face. He tried to pivot to run toward the landscaping, but a spotlight from a police helicopter cut through the darkness, pinning him to the ground in a circle of blinding white light. The wind from the rotors whipped up dust and debris, stinging his exposed skin. Over the loudspeaker, a voice boomed, commanding him to get on the ground. He didn't comply immediately. He stood there shaking his head violently, as if he could deny the reality unfolding around him. He held up his phone, screaming something that was lost in the roar of the chopper. I walked down the gangway, Nia following close behind me. We needed to see this. We needed to witness the final act of the tragedy he had written for himself. As we reached the dock, the agents moved in. They swarmed him, forcing him to his knees on the gravel. The gravel must have dug into his bare skin, but the pain on his face wasn't physical. It was the agony of a narcissist watching his reflection shatter. I approached the perimeter just as a special agent in a navy jacket began to read Preston his rights. The agent's voice was calm, monotone, and utterly devoid of sympathy. Preston Walsh, you are under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, and embezzlement. We have a warrant for the seizure of all assets and electronic devices. Preston twisted in the grip of the two officers holding his arms. This is a mistake, he screamed, his voice cracking. I'm a businessman. I have investors. Call my lawyer. Call Arthur Sterling. He knows me. The agent looked down at him with a look of mild boredom. We spoke to Mr. Sterling an hour ago. He provided us with the emails you sent attempting to solicit funds under false pretenses. And we have the forensic accounting from your father-in-law's legal team. We know about the shell companies, Preston. We know about the vendor theft. We know about the second mortgage you forged your wife's signature on. It is over. Preston looked up and saw me standing just outside the police line. His eyes locked onto mine. He stopped struggling. He realized in that moment that I hadn't just stripped him of his clothes. I had stripped him of his future. I signaled to the agent, asking for a brief moment. The agent nodded, giving me space. I walked up to Preston. He looked pathetic, kneeling there in his underwear, the flashing lights painting his pale skin in grotesque hues. I leaned down close to his ear. I wanted to make sure he heard every syllable. I wanted my voice to be the last thing he remembered before the cell door slammed shut. Do not worry about your gambling debts, Preston. I whispered, my voice a low rumble. You do not owe the Russians anymore. You do not owe the street gangs. You owe me. I bought your paper this morning. Every cent you borrowed, every marker you laid down belongs to me now. Preston's eyes widened in horror. He understood what that meant. In the criminal world, the debt holder owns the man. And since I am your creditor, I have a vested interest in your safety. I continued. I made a few calls to the facility where you will be held pending trial. I have friends in low places too, Preston, not just high ones. I told them you are coming. I told them you are special. You are going to be very well taken care of inside. You will not be lonely. It was a psychological knife twist. I wasn't actually going to have him hurt. I wasn't a monster, but I wanted him to believe I could. I wanted him to spend every night in his cell looking over his shoulder, wondering if the old plumber had reached through the bars to tighten the faucet. Preston let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. You cannot do this, he wailed. You are supposed to be family. Help me, Luther. Please. I will pay you back. I will work. I will do anything. I stood up and dusted off my tuxedo trousers. You are right, Preston, I said loud enough for Nia to hear. I am family. I am the father you tried to kill and the father-in-law you tried to rob, and this is me helping you. I am helping you learn the one lesson you never understood. Consequences. I turned my back on him. Take him away, I said to the agents. The officers hauled him to his feet. He was dead weight, his legs dragging on the ground. As they pulled him toward the back of the cruiser, he began to scream my name. Luther, he howled a raw, animalistic sound. Luther, wait. Nia, tell him. Tell him to stop. Nia, I love you. Nia stood beside me, her arms wrapped around herself against the night breeze. She watched the man she had married, the man she had defended, the man she had loved, being stuffed into the backseat of a police car like a bag of trash. She saw him for what he was, a coward, a thief, a liar. She didn't step forward, she didn't cry out, she didn't shed a single tear. Her face was a mask of calm resolution. She was mourning the death of her marriage, but she was celebrating the survival of her self-respect. He kept screaming her name until the heavy door slammed shut, cutting off his voice. The cruiser rocked as he thrashed against the window, his face pressed against the glass, distorted and terrified. The engine roared to life. Nia took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. Is he gone? She asked, her voice steady. He is gone, I confirmed, putting an arm around her shoulders. He is gone, and he is never coming back to hurt you again. She nodded. She watched the taillights of the police car fade into the distance, merging with the city traffic. She didn't look back at the yacht. She didn't look at the luxury cars. She looked at me. "Let us go home, Dad," she said. We walked back toward my truck, leaving the scene of his destruction behind us. The sirens faded into the night, but the silence they left behind was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of peace. The last police cruiser disappeared into the darkness of the Miami night, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the noise of the party. The Black Pearl rocked gently in the harbor, the water lapping against the hull with a rhythmic, soothing sound that contrasted sharply with the violence of the last hour. The guests had fled, scrambling down the gangway the moment the handcuffs clicked shut on Preston's wrists, terrified of being associated with a fraud. The staff moved silently in the background, clearing away abandoned champagne flutes and plates of uneaten caviar, erasing the physical remnants of the evening. But the emotional debris would take much longer to clear. I sat on a white leather sofa on the aft deck, looking out at the city skyline. My tuxedo jacket was unbuttoned, my tie loosened. For the first time all night, I felt my age. The adrenaline that had fueled my performance on stage and my confrontation with Preston was fading, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Nia sat opposite me. She held a cup of hot tea in her hands, staring into the dark liquid as if it held the answers to the questions swirling in her mind. She looked small. The vibrant woman I had raised seemed to have shrunk under the weight of 5 years of emotional abuse. She finally looked up. Her eyes were swollen, but dry. "I am so sorry, Dad," she whispered. Her voice was cracked and raw. "I let him treat you like a dog. I let him make you sit on newspapers. I let him call you a plumber. I was so weak. I was so afraid of losing him that I lost myself. I am ashamed." I looked at my daughter. I saw the guilt eating her alive. It would be easy to comfort her, to tell her it wasn't her fault that she was a victim. But that would be a lie. We were both responsible for the monster Preston had become. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Do not apologize for being weak. Nia," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "Apologize for not trusting your own eyes. But I have an apology to make too." She looked confused. You saved me." I shook my head. "I saved you from the fire, but I am the one who built the house with flammable material. I kept my success a secret from you. I thought I was teaching you humility. I thought I was protecting you from the corruption of wealth. I drove that old truck and wore these old clothes because I wanted you to find a man who loved you, not for the bank's fortune." I paused, looking at my calloused hands. But I was wrong. By hiding who we were, I made you think you were small. I made you think you had to settle. I made you think that a man like Preston, with his rented suits and fake watches, was a prize because he seemed to have what we lacked. I turned you into bait, Nia. I let a wolf into the hen house because I was too stubborn to turn on the lights. Nia put her cup down. A single tear rolled down her cheek. "I never cared about the money, Dad. I just wanted a family. I thought he loved me. He loved what he thought he could take from you," I said. "And that is my burden to carry. I watched him break you down piece by piece, and I waited too long to stop it because I wanted to be sure. I used you as part of my trap. I let him humiliate you tonight so I could destroy him completely. For that I am sorry." Nia stood up and crossed the small space between us. She sat next to me and rested her head on my shoulder. It was the same thing she used to do when she was a little girl and had scraped her knee. I put my arm around her, holding her tight. We sat there for a long time, two survivors on a billion-dollar boat, mourning the time we had lost. The reconciliation wasn't a magical fix. It was a start. It was the resetting of a broken bone, painful but necessary for healing. We cried together, not for Preston, but for the years of distance, for the secrets that had built a wall between us. I realized that my pride in being a self-made man had become a barrier to being a present father. I had been testing her husband when I should have been protecting my daughter. After the tears subsided, I pulled a handkerchief from my pocket and handed it to her. "Dry your eyes, Nia. We are banks. We do not wallow. We work." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a folded document. It was the last piece of paper Sarah had prepared for me. I smoothed it out on the low table in front of us. "What is this?" Nia asked, wiping her face. "This is the future," I said. "It is a transfer of equity. Effective immediately, I am signing over 50% of the voting shares of Banks Logistics to you." Nia recoiled as if the paper were hot. "No, Dad. I cannot. I do not know anything about shipping. I do not know anything about business. Look at my life. I married a con artist. I cannot run a company. I am not asking you to run the ships," I said, cutting her off. I have admirals for that. I have operations managers who have been with me for 20 years. They know how to move cargo. I pointed to the document. I am giving you the shares, but there is a condition, a non-negotiable condition. She looked at me wary. What condition? You are going to take over the bank's foundation, I said. We have assets of over $50 million allocated for community development, education, and legal defense for the elderly. Until today, it has been a checkbook that I opened once a year. From tomorrow, it is your job. But I do not know how to manage a foundation, she protested. Then you will learn, I said, my voice hardening. You will go to the office at 8 in the morning. You will read the bylaws. You will hire staff. You will audit the accounts. You will learn how to spot a fraud because you have lived with one. You will learn how to protect assets because you almost lost yours. You are starting from zero, Nia. I am not giving you a salary. You will pay yourself from the value you create. I looked her dead in the eye. Preston made you feel useless. He made you feel small. The only way to fix that is to build something big. You are going to take this pain and you are going to turn it into power. You are going to become the woman who saw through a thief and survived. Nia looked at the paper. She looked at her hands, the hands that had slapped her husband just hours ago. She took a deep breath. She picked up the pen I had placed on the table. Her hand trembled for a second and then it steadied. I will do it, she said. She signed her name. It wasn't a scribble, it was a signature. Bold, clear, defined. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had worn in years. Good. Now go get some sleep. Tomorrow we have work to do. And Nia, wear something sharp. You are the boss now. She stood up and walked toward the cabin. She walked differently. The slump in her shoulders was gone. She looked like a woman who had just been given a sword and told to defend her kingdom. I stayed on the deck watching the sunrise begin to bleed purple and gold over the horizon. The nightmare was over. The silence was no longer heavy. It was full of promise. The plumber had fixed the leak. Now it was time to rebuild the house. 6 months is a long time when you are waiting for a table at a restaurant, but it is an eternity when you are wearing a Department of Corrections jumpsuit. Preston Walsh, the man who once complained about the thread count of his napkins, was now scrubbing industrial baking sheets in the humid kitchen of the Federal Correctional Institution in Miami. I had heard through my contacts that his adjustment period had been difficult. The arrogance that had served him so poorly in the outside world had made him a target inside. He stood in front of a deep stainless steel sink, the water gray and greasy, struggling to scrape burnt lasagna off a metal tray. His hands, once manicured and soft, were now raw and red-cracked from the harsh soap and hot water. He wasn't the boss here. He wasn't an investment banker. He was the lowest rung on the ladder, a position he had always assigned to people like me. "Hey, Wall Street," a voice boomed from behind him. A large inmate named Davis, who ran the kitchen crew, slammed a stack of dirty trays onto the counter, splashing soapy water onto Preston's chest. "You missed a spot on the last batch. Do it again." Preston flinched. He didn't argue. He didn't threaten to call his lawyer. He didn't talk about his connections. He just nodded his head down, eyes fixed on the dirty water. "Yes, Davis, I will do it again." He picked up the scouring pad and went back to work. I watched the security footage my lawyer had legally obtained for a progress report on his rehabilitation. It was a cruel thing to watch, perhaps, but necessary. He was finally learning the value of manual labor. He was finally understanding that when you strip away the lies and the rented suits, a man is defined only by what he can do with his hands. And right now, all Preston could do was clean up other people's messes. It was poetic justice served on a plastic cafeteria tray. He had spent his life trying to avoid getting his hands dirty, and now dirt was his entire world. He lived in a cage built of his own choices, and for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he belonged. While Preston was rotting in the dark, my daughter was blooming in the light. The bank's foundation offices were located in a renovated warehouse in the Arts District, a space that hummed with energy and purpose. I stood by the glass wall of her office, watching her lead a strategy meeting. Nia had changed. The timid woman who had tracked her own mileage to avoid an argument was dead and buried. In her place sat a CEO. She wore a sharp navy blazer, her hair pulled back in a practical bun, her face free of the heavy makeup Preston had always insisted she wear. She looked like herself. She looked like a Banks. She was listening to a grant proposal from a local director who wanted funding for a youth trade school program. The director was nervous, stuttering over his numbers. The old Nia would have been passive, letting the conversation drift. This Nia leaned forward, her eyes laser-focused. "I like the vision, Marcus," she said, her voice clear and authoritative. "But your overhead projections are too high. You have 30% allocated for administration. I want that down to 15. The money needs to go to the students, not the paperwork. If you can restructure the budget by Monday, we will fund the pilot program." The director nodded, impressed and intimidated. "Thank you, Ms. Banks. I will get it done." She didn't look at me for approval. She didn't need it anymore. She closed the file and moved to the next item on the agenda. She was tough, she was fair, and she was brilliant. She had taken the pain of her marriage and forged it into a weapon against injustice. She was no longer defined by who she was married to, but by what she was building. Later that afternoon, she walked out of the meeting and saw me waiting. She didn't rush over with a hug, she walked over with a confident stride. "We recovered another $200,000 from Preston's hidden offshore accounts today," she told me, handing me a report. "I liquidated it and put it into the legal defense fund for the elderly. I thought it was fitting." I smiled. "It is perfect. You are doing good work, Nia. Beatrice would be proud." "I am doing it for me, Dad," she said simply, "and for everyone who has ever been made to feel small." I left her to her work. My legacy was safe. My daughter was no longer a victim, she was a warrior. And I had one last stop to make. The sun was setting over the marina, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold. The Black Pearl sat in her slip, a gleaming white leviathan that dominated the dock. The crew was busy prepping for a charter trip to the Bahamas. I walked past the security checkpoint where the guard nodded respectfully at me. I wasn't wearing my tuxedo. I wasn't wearing a suit. I was wearing my old blue coveralls stained with grease on the knees and a faded baseball cap pulled low over my eyes. I carried my toolbox, the metal handle cool and familiar in my grip. I walked down to the lower deck near the engine room access. There was a persistent rattle in the secondary water pump that had been bothering me for a week. I could have hired a mechanic. I could have snapped my fingers and had a team of engineers fix it in an hour. But I didn't want to. I wanted to feel the metal. I wanted to solve the problem myself. There is a peace in fixing things that money cannot buy. I knelt down by the pump housing, laying out my wrenches on a rag. I opened the casing and peered inside. It was a loose bearing, just as I suspected. I greased my hands and went to work, humming a low tune, losing myself in the simple, honest rhythm of labor. "Excuse me, old man." The voice was sharp, impatient. I paused, my wrench clamped around a bolt. I looked up. A young man in a crisp white crew uniform stood over me. He was new, probably hired this week. He looked at my dirty clothes, my greasy hands, and my old toolbox with a sneer of superiority. "You cannot be here," the young man said, gesturing toward the dock. "This is a private vessel. Crew and guests only. We do not allow vagrants or unauthorized contractors. You are blocking the walkway. Move it." I looked at him. He reminded me of Preston. Not in his face, but in his assumption. He saw dirt, and he assumed weakness. He saw labor, and he assumed lack of worth. I stood up slowly, wiping my hands on a rag. I was a head taller than him. I looked him in the eye. "You are right, son," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I am blocking the walkway." I turned back to the pump, gave the bolt one final tightening turn, and closed the casing. The rattle stopped. The machine hummed perfectly. The young man huffed, rolling his eyes. "I said move, or do I need to call security to drag you off?" I chuckled. It was a deep, rumbling sound. "No need to call security. They know where I am." I picked up my toolbox. I looked at the young man again. He was just a kid, arrogant and blind, but he wasn't evil. He just didn't know who he was talking to. "You did a good job spotting an intruder," I said, patting him on the shoulder with a heavy grease-stained hand. "Keep that vigilance, but next time check the owner's manual before you try to evict the captain." I turned and walked away toward the captain's quarters. "Wait!" the young man called out, confusion clouding his face. "Who are you?" I stopped. I looked back at him, the setting sun framing my silhouette against the vast ocean. "I am the plumber," I said with a smile. "And this is my yacht." I walked into the sunset, leaving him standing there, mouth open, staring at the back of the man who owned the horizon. I was Luther Banks. I had built an empire with my hands, and I had saved my family with my mind. And as I looked out at the open water, I knew one thing for sure. No one would ever underestimate me again. My story isn't just about revenge. It is a warning to anyone who judges a book by its cover. We live in a world obsessed with appearances where a rented suit often commands more respect than calloused hands. But I learned that true power doesn't need to shout or show off. It sits quietly in the background, built on a foundation of integrity and hard work. Preston chased the illusion of wealth and lost his soul, while I kept my hands dirty and kept my dignity. Never underestimate the quiet ones, and never forget that the strongest structures are built by the humblest hands. If you have ever been underestimated by someone who only saw your surface, tell me your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales of justice.